Chapter 208. Go to watch net. Early the next morning, Tiannan City was once again jammed with traffic. By the time Li Yundong arrived at Tiannan University with the fan of 7 treasures on his back, it was already 9:30 a.m. watch net. 7 k.o.m. Li Yundong couldn't help but mutter to himself as he got out of the car, I wonder when I'll be able to fly to school. I won't have to suffer from traffic jams anymore. Li Yundong walked into the school with the fan of 7 treasures on his back. As soon as he entered the school, he ran into Feng Na. Li Yundong. Feng Na's voice was clear and crisp. As soon as she shouted, those who knew Li Yundong turned their heads and looked at her with different expressions. Li Yundong had learned to live under such attention. He smiled at Feng Na and said, "What's the matter, future president of the student council? What can I do for you?" Feng Na waved her hand and smilingly said, "Don't make fun of me. We haven't even started yet. By the way, I'm attending a campaign speech tomorrow. Are you coming?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll definitely come." "When exactly?" Feng Na smiled and said, 7:30 p.m., the school's small auditorium. As soon as he heard about the auditorium, Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the storm caused by the days of living with a stewardess incident. He subconsciously didn't want to go there. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Why did you choose this place?" Feng Na had also thought of this matter. She giggled and said, "What does it have to do with me? Do you think I want to?" As they walked side by side into the school, Li Yundong said, "Where's Ching Ching? Isn't she inseparable from you?" Feng Na sighed and said, "Alas, don't mention it. I'm in my senior year, and I'm about to graduate. I'm about to enter the big vat that is society. I'm busy looking for a job." Li Yundong said in surprise, "It's only the beginning of the 4th year. Are you busy looking for a job?" Feng Na smiled. Clumsy birds have to start flying early. Ching Cheng's family background isn't very good. This summer, she's interning at a company. Once she becomes an intern, she might be able to become a permanent employee. So, she won't be coming to some classes for now. She'll try her best to settle her work first. Li Yundong asked, "What about you? Do you have any intention of working?" Feng Na sighed. How can it be that easy? How hard was it to find a good job these days? I want to work at a TV station, but I can't get in because I don't have any connections. Hearing this, Li Yundong secretly sighed in his heart. If he hadn't embarked on the path of cultivation, perhaps in another year, he would also have to worry about all kinds of employment problems like Ching Cheng and Feng Na. Watch net. Feng Na turned to look at Li Yundong and asked with a smile, "What about you? What's your plan?" Li Yundong chuckled and said with emotion, "I don't have any plans. I'm just a layman with no ambition." Feng Na pointed a finger at Li Yundong and laughed. Excessive modesty equals arrogance. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm not being modest. I really haven't thought about what I want to do after graduation." As he said this, he sighed and looked at the familiar campus. He sighed and said, "I just feel that the days pass so quickly. In the blink of an eye, I'm almost a senior. More than half of my college life has passed." Feng Na sighed. "Yeah, that's why I have to find a way to add something important to my resume during my senior year. Otherwise, I won't run for the president of the student council." Li Yundong smiled. "Feng Na, you'll be fine. With your qualifications, you'll definitely be the #1 actress in our Tiannan TV station in the future." Feng Na smiled sweetly. "Thank you for your auspicious words." While the two of them were talking, Feng Na had already reached the bottom of the teaching building. Seeing that Li Yundong had no intention of going to class, she couldn't help but ask, "You don't have any classes this morning?" Li Yundong smiled and patted the bag hanging on top of the fan of 7 treasures. "I'm going to the library to return some books." Feng Na's eyes fell on the fan of 7 treasures, which was tightly wrapped in black cloth on Li Yundong's back. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "What on earth are you carrying?" "Last time I saw you carrying such a big and long thing, I wanted to ask you about it." Li Yundong smiled and dodged the question. "It's nothing. It's just something very important." Feng Na saw that Li Yundong was being vague, but she didn't pursue the matter. Instead, she just let out an "oh." The curiosity in her eyes grew. She watched as Li Yundong walked a few meters away. Suddenly, she shouted, "Li Yundong!" Li Yundong stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Feng Na stared at Li Yundong. "You're going to be an amazing person in the future," she said in a serious tone. Li Yundong smiled. "Why do you say that all of a sudden?" Feng Na put her hands behind her back and shook her head. "There's no reason. I just feel that a boy like you will definitely achieve great things in the future. Maybe you will become the boss of a big company." Li Yundong laughed. "I'm already a man with negative assets. How can I be the boss of a big company? But, thanks for your kind words. Is this considered reciprocity?" Feng Na chuckled. "No, I really think so. Who knows, maybe Ching Cheng and I will go to you in the future. You have to give us a bowl of rice to eat." Li Yundong didn't care. He smiled. "Fine. You sent yourself to my door and let me, a capitalist with negative assets, exploit you. I have no reason to be merciful." Feng Na giggled and waved at Li Yundong. "Then I'm going to class. See you later. Remember to come back in 2 days." "You have to come." Li Yundong waved back. "I'll be there." After watching Feng Na go upstairs, he turned around and walked toward the library. Go to Kanban. 7Ko/ along the way, Li Yundong pondered, what can I do in the future? Or, how can I support myself in the future? I can't live off a woman all day long, can I? What the hell? As the saying goes, one's mouth is soft when one is fed, and one's hands are short when one is fed. How could one cultivate if one relied on relief or lived off a woman all day long? Even if I start cultivating, I won't be able to do it. Plus, I still have to support Su Chan in the future. I can't let her suffer with me, can I? I have to find a way to make money. But how can I make money? Li Yundong thought back to his 2 years in university. It was a complete waste of time. Plus, the Chinese department I'm in is **T. I don't even know what kind of job I should find after I graduate. It seems like any job would be suitable for me, but then again, none of them seem to be suitable for me. What the F***ck was going on? Why did I choose the Chinese department back then? It's such a lame major." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Even a finance major would be good. It would be so much easier to find a job. Li Yundong thought as he walked. From the teaching building to the library, he had to pass through the school field. As soon as he reached the field, he heard a burst of shouting coming from the field. He turned his head and was immediately amused. He saw a group of young students in green uniforms doing military training on the spacious and flat lawn of the field. At this time, it was the season of autumn. The sun above their heads was scorching the students on the sports field, making them sweat profusely. Some of them were standing in military postures on the sports field under the scorching sun, some were lifting their legs, and some were learning military boxing from the instructors. As Li Yundong walked across the field, he looked at the new students with a smile on his face. He couldn't help but think of the days when he first entered the school. These students who were in the middle of military training also saw Li Yundong passing through the playground. Some of them recognized him from the forum and whispered to each other, "Hey, is that Li Yundong? Yeah, he doesn't look like the PP and video in the post. Well, he's a little tanned, but I think he's more handsome. Hey, what's that thing he's carrying? Why does it look so heavy? I don't know. Maybe it's a prop he uses to act cool." Act cool? I think it's pretentious, isn't it? Come on, people who have the ability to act cool are called awesome, and some people who don't have the ability to act cool are called idiots. Humph, I don't believe he's that great. In my opinion, it's all bragging. The new students whispered to each other and pointed at Li Yundong. The instructor next to them shouted, "What are you arguing about?" This loud shout shocked the students and made them tremble all over. They withdrew their gazes one after another, not daring to look at Li Yundong again, let alone say a word. One by one, they stood obediently. Only a tall and burly boy looked at Li Yundong's back thoughtfully, and his eyes gradually emitted a sharp and excited light. Li Yundong went to the school library to return the books and then borrowed a few more. He didn't want to go to class, so he sat in the reading area and flipped through the books while thinking about a question: what can I do in the future? What skills can I use to make a living and make money? Although cultivation could transcend all living beings, without money, there was no way to solve the problem of eating and drinking. The further Li Yundong walked on the path of cultivation, the more he understood that money wasn't everything when it came to cultivation, but money was absolutely necessary. Li Yundong pulled out a piece of paper and a pen from his bag and wrote down all the skills he knew on it. Then, he stared blankly at them one by one. He realized that other than being good at fighting and treating minor illnesses, he really didn't know anything else. What am I supposed to do? What can I do about it? Li Yundong couldn't help but worry. But just as he was worrying, he suddenly heard the crisp sound of a slap coming from the quiet reading room. Li Yundong turned his head and saw a girl crying at a boy. "You bastard! You bastard! How could you break up with me?" As she said this, she waved her fist and punched the boy. Li Yundong took a closer look and suddenly smiled. "Hey, isn't this the boy with the peach blossom eyes who was diagnosed by Su Chan as having a deficiency of yin in his kidney?" This handsome boy really did look like a magnet for bees and butterflies. He didn't expect that the girl in front of him would act up on the spot and slap him in front of everyone. He was anxious and angry. He covered his cheek with his hand, and his face turned purple. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. The girl hysterically cursed and hit him. "Yes, I'm crazy. I'm crazy because I like you, you bastard. I'm going to kill you today." Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, the handsome boy suddenly felt dizzy. Just like last time when he was with Su Chan, he used his excellent tradition. He couldn't breathe, his eyes rolled back, his mouth crooked, and he passed out. Out of the blue, people always ask me, "Tang Tang, how long have you been writing? How many chapters are there in your book?" Questions like that. Every time, I can only smile bitterly. How would I know? That's right. You're the one who wrote this book. How could you not know? By the way, your life is still your own. Do you know how long you can live? Do you know how long you can live? Hee, you don't know either, do you? Unless you kill yourself immediately, you won't be able to answer my questions. Neither will I. Unless I kill myself immediately, I won't be able to answer your questions either. So, please, don't ask this kind of question again in the future. Just keep reading. You guys only asked once, but I've been asked countless times. I can't take it anymore. Please, please, thank you, thank you. /OM/ Chapter 209. Go to watch net. Although school had just started, there were still many senior students who chose to study in the cool and quiet reading room of the library. Watch net. 7 KOM. As soon as the handsome man fainted, the students in the reading room all stood up, stretched their necks, and looked curiously at the crime scene. Li Yundong glanced at him and found that the handsome man was lying on the ground, twitching and foaming at the mouth. Li Yundong's heart trembled and he walked over. Out of the way, everyone out of the way. As soon as Li Yundong took a step forward, a voice rang out. He turned his head and suddenly found that the person who spoke was also an acquaintance. It was Yan Hua, who had followed Wan Hongling to enter the examination as the top scorer. Yan Hua drove away the onlookers and said, "Everyone, don't crowd around here. It will make it difficult for him to breathe." As he spoke, he turned around and was about to look at the fainted handsome man, but he saw Li Yundong walking toward him. Yan Hua was stunned and frowned inwardly. Why is he here? Li Yundong wanted to check on the beautiful man's condition, but it was very inconvenient for him to carry the fan of 7 treasures on his back. He couldn't even bend down, so he had to untie the fan of 7 treasures and put it aside. Then, he squatted down to check on the beautiful man's condition. When the girl next to him saw Li Yundong reaching out to the handsome man, she immediately asked anxiously, "What are you doing?" Li Yundong glanced at her indifferently. Although he didn't say a word, the girl felt a kind of dignified aura coming from him. She was speechless and didn't dare to stop him again. Li Yundong felt the pulse of the beautiful man and frowned secretly. Yan Hua, who was beside him, sneered and said, "You also know medicine." Yan Hua had been holding back his anger and wanted to compete with Li Yundong. Seeing that Li Yundong's movements didn't seem to be pretending, he couldn't help but ask, "What is the diagnosis of this person's illness?" "What kind of diagnosis?" When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately raised his head and looked at Yan Hua in surprise. "You know traditional Chinese medicine?" TCM was different from Western medicine, which was a precise microscopic science. TCM was a medical science that regulated and adjusted from a macroscopic perspective. To observe and determine a person's illness, one must start from the 4 aspects of look, listen, question, and feel the pulse. Furthermore, several doctors would often diagnose different illnesses, which required medical theory to differentiate. Li Yundong had read a lot of medical books these days, so he naturally understood this. As soon as he heard Yan Hua's words, he knew that this arrogant young man obviously knew Chinese medicine. Watch net. 7 KOM. Yan Hua proudly raised his chin. "I don't dare to say that I understand. I only know a little." "Do you dare to argue with me here?" Li Yundong didn't comment. "Oh," he said. He opened the eyelids of the beautiful man, looked at him, and said casually, "Why didn't you go to military training?" Yan Hua snorted. "I'm a specially recruited student. I don't need to go to military training. Do you really think I'm a weak bookworm?" Li Yundong glanced at him, smiled slightly, and didn't answer. Seeing Li Yundong like this, Yan Hua became angry. He felt that Li Yundong was looking down on him, but he was also a person who thought highly of himself. He thought to himself, "What's so great about you? Why do you look down on me?" "I look down on you." Yan Hua couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, do you dare to argue with me here?" Li Yundong smiled. He helped the beautiful man up and said to the girl who was wiping her tears, "You hold him." The girl was panicking and at a loss. Subconsciously, she listened to Li Yundong's words and supported the handsome man with her hand. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't answer him, Yan Hua thought that Li Yundong was guilty. He sneered and said, "I don't think you dare. This man's illness is obviously kidney deficiency. I'll prick him with a needle, and he'll wake up immediately." A curious student couldn't help but ask, "You also know acupuncture?" Yan Hua said proudly, "Of course." He touched his body casually, and suddenly a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. "But I didn't bring a needle today. Do any of you have a hair clip or something? Can I borrow it?" Immediately, a girl took a hair clip from her head and handed it over. Yan Hua took it and thanked her. "Thank you very much." As he said this, he turned around and was about to show his skills, but he saw Li Yundong's palm pressing on the beautiful man's head, as if he was massaging him. Yan Hua suddenly said angrily, "What are you doing? Get out of the way, don't waste time. You don't even know how to argue. How can you treat people?" As soon as his voice fell, he saw Li Yundong suddenly grab the beautiful man's head with his 5 fingers, as if he had lifted something. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful man snorted and woke up. The surrounding students suddenly burst into an uproar. "He's awake, he's awake. The girl next to him couldn't help crying. She threw herself into the beautiful man's arms, crying and shouting, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. You scared me to death just now." When the beautiful man woke up, he saw the girl in his arms crying, and his heart softened. He said, "It's my fault. I shouldn't have broken up with you. Watch net." Seeing that the two of them had made up, Li Yundong said with a smile, "It's all right now. The rain has passed. But I'll have to trouble you to change the place when it rains and thunders. This is not a good place for a sitcom." His words made the students around him laugh. Yan Hua stared at Li Yundong with his mouth agape. He couldn't understand how Li Yundong could make the boy recover just by touching his head with his hand. Could it be that this boy just happened to wake up? Yan Hua thought to himself. When he saw the students around him laughing, his heart suddenly tightened and he thought to himself, what are these people laughing at? Could it be that he was laughing at me for trying to argue with Li Yundong and calling me a nerd? Just now, he had chased after Li Yundong to argue with him, but Li Yundong had not answered his words at all. He had cured this person with a wave of his hand. In contrast, he had simply become a bookworm who only knew how to show off his tongue. The more Yan Hua thought about it, the more he felt that these people were laughing at him. He looked at Li Yundong with jealousy, hatred, annoyance, and anger. He felt that the exclamations and praises of these people around him should be directed at him, but Li Yundong had forcibly stolen his limelight. Yan Hua had been an excellent student since he was a child. Wherever he went, he was pursued and worshipped by his classmates. He thought that the students of this third-rate university would admire him very much because he was the top scholar, but the truth was the opposite. This damned Li Yundong seemed to have been sent by God to deliberately mess with him, making him appear shallow and childish all the time, just like a nerd. Yan Hua looked at the handsome man coldly and couldn't help but say sarcastically, "I advise you to work less when it comes to sex in the future. With your body, if you continue to work like this, I'm afraid it won't be long before you die young." This sentence made the surrounding students burst into laughter. The handsome man's face also turned red, and he was so embarrassed that he couldn't speak. A trace of fear flashed in his eyes. The girls around him also blushed, as if they were about to bleed. Secretly, they pinched the flesh of the handsome man's waist with their fingers. Li Yundong patted the handsome man on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I won't die young." Of course, the handsome man recognized Li Yundong, who was an influential figure. He asked tentatively, "Really?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Of course." The handsome man's face suddenly brightened up, as if he had taken a tranquilizer. He said to the girl next to him with great joy, "You see, I'm so young. It's impossible for me to die young because of this kind of thing." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, "However, your kidney deficiency is too serious. Your kidney essence is not strong, and your yuanyang is insufficient. Although you won't die young, premature ejaculation is certain." Premature ejaculation. This sentence was even more powerful and shocking than the explosion of a nuclear hydrogen bomb. The students around suddenly stomped their feet and laughed wildly. The handsome man's face suddenly turned as red as a pig's liver, but the girl didn't blush at all. She glared at the boy arrogantly, as if to prove that Li Yundong's words were true. Li Yundong smiled. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, the handsome man grabbed him and whispered, "Boss, you are too cruel. How can you say that I have premature ejaculation in front of so many people? Do you want me to be a man?" Li Yundong said with a serious face, "Last semester, my girlfriend said that your kidney deficiency is too serious. She told you not to overindulge in sex, but you didn't listen. Now, when you are nervous and excited, you will easily pass out. Do you know why?" The handsome man's face turned purple. He shook his head and said, "I don't know." Li Yundong said, "It's because you have consumed too much essence qi in your body. When you encounter this kind of thing, your qi and blood can't supply, so you will easily pass out. You have to be careful. If you don't pay attention, it will not be a problem of premature ejaculation. It will definitely be a problem of early death. Seeing that Li Yundong was about to leave, the handsome man reached out and grabbed his arm. He begged, "Boss, you can't just watch me die. Is there any good medicine that can help me?" Li Yundong thought for a moment, put down the fan of 7 treasures, sat down, took out a notebook and pen, and wrote a prescription for strengthening yang and nourishing the kidneys. Then, he tore off the paper and handed it to the handsome man, saying, "As the saying goes, food is better than medicine, food is better than spiritual nourishment, and spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment. Don't be superstitious about these things." The handsome man took the prescription and glanced at it. He said curiously, "I've heard that food is better than medicine, but food is better than spiritual nourishment, and spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment. What does spiritual nourishment mean?" Li Yundong explained, "Food is better than spiritual nourishment. It means that you need to calm down every day, clear your mind, and control your desires. Don't be easily irritable. The 7 emotions and 6 desires are very harmful to the body. When your emotions are good, your mood will be good. Once you are in a good mood, it will be more useful than anything you eat." When Wu Zixu passed through Shaoguan, why did his hair turn white overnight? It was because his emotions were filled with fear and panic that his kidney essence was injured. You see, there are already white hairs in your hair, which means that your kidneys have begun to have problems. Be more careful. As Li Yundong spoke, some of the curious students around him also listened attentively and nodded one after another. They felt that Li Yundong's words were very reasonable. Some people even took out pens and quickly wrote down every word Li Yundong said. At this time, the handsome man didn't want to hide his illness for fear of treatment. He asked again, "What does it mean that spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment?" Li Yundong said, "It's useless to just have a good mood and eat good food all day long, because people need to exercise more. As the saying goes, life is about exercise. That's the truth. If you are in a good mood all day long and eat good food, but don't exercise, it will only create a fat pig, and it will not make your body better at all. Therefore, more exercise is the best way to nourish your body." Speaking of this, Li Yundong seemed to think of something and added, "Of course, bed exercise is not exercise, it is a matter of great catharsis. And exercise can't be too vigorous, like in the gym, it's not good to work hard and sweat a lot. That's called going too far is as bad as not going far enough. It's best to go out for a walk or jog for dozens of minutes, half an hour to an hour after eating. As the saying goes, walk 100 steps after a meal and live to 99. Li Yundong's words were simple and easy to understand. Not only did the handsome man suddenly understand, but the students around him also understood and looked at Li Yundong with admiration in their eyes. The handsome man carefully hid the prescription and said with a smile, "Boss, I admire you today. With such good medical skills, why don't you become a doctor?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Nowadays, people don't believe in traditional Chinese medicine." The handsome man said, "Then it's all the more reason to promote it." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and a voice in his mind shouted loudly, "That's right, why don't I use my advantage in cultivation to do something related to medical practice? I can make money this way, and I can also promote our Chinese culture. Why not?" Last week's flower list was regrettably only ranked 9th, and the 8th place was taken by Xiao Qian. The number of flowers for children's shoes reached a new high, but they were still regrettably defeated, although they were defeated with honor. This week's Tuesday and Saturday, tomorrow's third watch, children's shoes more flowers. /om/ Chapter 210. Go to watch net. It was as if someone in the fog had suddenly pointed him in the right direction. Although the path was still unclear, at least he knew where to go. At least he wouldn't be like a lost person who didn't know where to go. The beautiful man's words made Li Yundong feel as if he had been enlightened all of a sudden. Go to watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. New. After learning from Li Yundong about how to strengthen one's yang and nourish one's kidneys and how to nourish one's body, beautiful man left happily. Li Yundong, on the other hand, understood the direction of his future from beautiful man's words, and walked out of the library with joy in his heart. When he reached the door, he saw the old man in charge of the library. He smiled and nodded to him, then walked out of the door. Yan Hua, who had been looking at Li Yundong with hatred and jealousy, walked up to the old man and asked in surprise, "Grandpa, do you know him?" Yan Hua's grandfather laughed and said, "This is the person I told you about on the phone. What do you think? Are you convinced?" Yan Hua's face was ugly. He shouted, "Why should I be convinced? What's so great about him?" After that, he walked out angrily. Yan Hua's grandfather looked at Yan Hua and shook his head secretly. He sighed in his heart. This boy has been arrogant since he was a child. He is used to being flattered. I'm afraid this time he is going to suffer a big setback. When Li Yundong returned from the original path with the fan of 7 treasures on his back, most of the freshmen on the sports field had already rested. Many of them were resting under the shade of trees. Only one class was still persistently practicing military boxing under the sun. Li Yundong glanced at the class on the way back and found that it was actually a student practicing with an instructor. The other students were watching the scene on the field excitedly and nervously. It was not common for a student to fight an instructor. Li Yundong couldn't help but stop and take a second look. The instructor on the field wasn't very tall, standing at about 1.7 meters. However, his body was lean, his skin was tanned, and his eyes were bright and full of expression. With one look, one could tell that he was a martial artist. The freshman standing in front of him was wearing a camouflage uniform. He looked quite tall, and his sleeves were rolled up high. The muscles on his arms were like steel bars, and it was obvious that he was a martial artist of external martial arts. Go to watch net. When the boys saw Li Yundong standing not far away and watching, a trace of excitement suddenly flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath, leaped forward, and punched the instructor like a cannon. As soon as he made his move, Li Yundong secretly frowned. The moment an expert made a move, one would know whether or not he was an expert. Ordinary people would approach their opponents cautiously and observe their opponent's minute flaws while they were still, or they would circle around their opponent and observe their opponent's reaction and footsteps during the movement. From there, they would judge their opponent's agility. If the opponent's footwork was not as nimble as his, then he would walk around the opponent, trying to create an advantageous position where the opponent's back was to his advantage, and then fiercely attack the opponent's back. If the opponent's footwork was more nimble than his, then he would immediately rush forward and engage in hand-to-hand combat, not allowing the opponent to leave his attack range and footwork range. However, the moment the boy punched out, not only did he go straight for the instructor's chest, he didn't even bother to test his strength. Instead, he took a huge leap and his movements were so big that he didn't seem to care about the instructor at all. Moreover, in Li Yundong's opinion, the fact that the boy dared to do such a thing showed that he was indeed capable. His punches were fierce and experienced, and his moves were bold and presumptuous. If Li Yundong hadn't reached the Zhuji phase, it would have been very difficult for him to deal with the boy. The instructor practiced military boxing. Although there were striking techniques in military boxing, most of them focused on capturing and subduing the enemy. When the instructor saw that the student was coming at him aggressively and full of youthful vigor, he calmly took a step back. He grabbed the boy's fist with one hand and grabbed the boy's arm with the other. He leaned his body to the side, not only dodging the boy's fist, but also burrowed his entire body into the boy's chest. His legs dug into the boy's crotch, squeezed, and leaned. This move was very exciting. As long as the instructor spun his feet and followed the force just now, he would be able to turn his body to the back of the student. He would immediately be in an advantageous position and be able to subdue the opponent with the cross-lock grappling technique. But just as his legs were about to squeeze the boy's body, he suddenly felt an extremely powerful force coming from the boy. The student in front of him suddenly let out a loud roar and spat out an air cannon from his mouth, causing the instructor's heart to flutter. His body couldn't help but tremble, and then his whole body flew up with a whoosh. He actually flew 5 or 6 meters away, heading straight for Li Yundong like a cannonball. Go watch net. 7 K.O.M. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that he would be able to see a troublesome matter just by looking at it from the sidelines. He reached out and pressed on the back of the instructor. A gentle force was sent out, and the instructor was quietly blocked. The exchange between the student and the instructor was very fast. It could be said that it was as fast as lightning. The surrounding students only saw a blur before the instructor was sent flying. It was like a scene in a kung fu movie where the instructor was suspended on a wire. Wow! The freshmen immediately burst into an uproar. Some of them who knew the student immediately shouted excitedly, "Feng Ji, you're awesome." In the eyes of the freshmen, the instructors were lofty existences that could not be offended. However, Feng Ji, who was also a freshman like them, had actually sent the instructor flying in an extremely exaggerated manner. This immediately caused them to be astonished by Feng Ji. Some of the students in the dormitory who knew Feng Ji more or less began to brag about him with pride. Now you know how awesome Brother Feng is, right? You have to know that Brother Feng is the national martial arts champion. Are you serious? Why did the national martial arts champion come to our school? Why didn't he go to the sports school? Well, how would I know? But I heard that he's a specially enrolled student. After the instructor who had been sent flying stopped in his tracks, he looked back to see who had caught him. After seeing that it was also a student of this school, he was immediately stunned. He muttered to himself, "I felt like I had hit a wall just now. My opponent's hand was soft and strong, and I wasn't hurt at all. Obviously, he's also a master. When did Tiannan University become so crouching tigers and hidden dragons?" As he thought about it, he laughed self-deprecatingly. "Thank you so much. I didn't expect to embarrass myself so much today." Li Yundong smiled and said, "He has been practicing martial arts for many years. It's normal for him to lose." The instructor looked at Li Yundong. He saw that the boy in front of him was standing like a pine tree. Although his aura was extremely strong, he didn't give off an aggressive feeling like Feng Ji. Instead, he gave off a strong impression. The instructor asked curiously, "Are you also a martial artist?" Ever since Li Yundong had started practicing Shintong in the Zhuji phase, his powerful aura, which he couldn't restrain, had all been refined into the Jinqi of the Niden and stored in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen. Li Yundong's aggressive heroic spirit had also become restrained from the outside. He was no longer like before, where he would stab people of the same gender wherever he went. Li Yundong smiled at the instructor and said, "I guess so." As he said this, he subconsciously glanced at Feng Ji. Feng Ji, who was surrounded by these freshmen like stars surrounding the moon, also happened to look up at Li Yundong. Like an intruder who had just stepped into someone else's territory, he raised his chin and gave Li Yundong a provocative look. If it had been in the past, with Li Yundong's irritable character, he might have immediately greeted him with a sneer. But now, Li Yundong had succeeded in the Zhuji phase and his Shintong had appeared for the first time. His temperament had also changed, gradually becoming deep and tolerant. The sky accommodates all things, and the sea accommodates all rivers. It was impossible for people to kick or bite a dog to death just because they saw it barking at them on the side of the road. Because people knew that they were a level higher than this kind of vicious dog. Humans were the wisest of all things. It was the same for cultivators. When Li Yundong faced Feng Ji's provocation, he suddenly found that he was not shocked or angry, nor anxious. Instead, he felt a sense of condescension in his heart. At this moment, Li Yundong knew that deep in his heart, he had begun to completely accept the fact that he was a cultivator. He was stronger and more detached than most people in the world. He was a dignified cultivator with divine powers. Why would he bother with a freshman? In the face of Feng Ji's provocation, Li Yundong just smiled slightly. Like a breeze blowing on his face, he turned around and walked away, his figure elegant and calm. The instructor, who was much more mature than the students, looked at Li Yundong's back and secretly praised him. They knew that only a person who had really experienced storms and seen through the world could be so calm from behind. Only a truly powerful person could have such a gentle and tolerant smile. Li Yundong walked away freely, but the freshmen didn't think so. In their opinion, Li Yundong, who was very famous in the school, had obviously retreated in the face of the challenge of a freshman. The freshmen were always in awe of the older students. They came to the university with uneasiness, fresh curiosity, and some ambition. As freshmen who had just been released from the cage of high school, deep in their hearts was a soul that longed to show itself. They longed to perform and to be in the limelight, especially when they found that there was a freshman like them around them who was strong enough to challenge the authority of the most legendary figure in the school. The restlessness and rebellion in their hearts all broke out in an instant. Humph, what legendary figure? I think he's a coward. That's right. He walked away so arrogantly. What's so great about him? Hey, you don't understand. He's smart. What's the benefit of fighting with you here? If you win, people will say that you bully the freshmen. If you lose, it's even worse. You'll lose everything. This is called shrewdness. Do you understand? Humph, I saw the posts on the forum praising him so much that I thought he was very awesome. I didn't expect that he was also a wily old fox. I despise him. Are you qualified to despise him? Who do you think you are? Only our brother Feng is qualified. Humph, flatterer. The students whispered to each other, while Feng Ji stood still and stared at Li Yundong's back. He was like a young lion, his eyes sharp and threatening. He clenched his fists so hard that they made cracking sounds, like beans being fried, which made people's hair stand on end. If you don't throw flowers while reading, be careful that you die young. Ahem, that's right. /om/. Chapter 211. Go to watch net. After class, Li Yundong headed to the cafeteria for lunch as usual. While he was waiting in line, he heard Feng Na calling out to him from behind. Li Yundong. Li Yundong turned his head and greeted her with a smile. Watch net. Color ** literature _learning% super #speed. Update. The two of them took the dishes and sat down at the table. Feng Na smiled and said, by the way, I forgot to tell you something this morning. While eating, Li Yundong asked, what's the matter? Feng Na noticed that he was chewing carefully and swallowing slowly. He took a long time to chew each mouthful of rice before swallowing it slowly. His movements were so gentle that he didn't look like a man at all. She asked curiously, when did you become so gentle when you eat? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Only then did he realize that he had completely integrated into the role of a cultivator. While eating, he subconsciously remembered what Zi Yuan had said. He smiled and asked Feng Na what Zi Yuan had once said, tell me, why do people have to chew slowly? Are you afraid that you won't be able to digest it? Feng Na said with a smile as she tucked her hair behind her ear. Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, that's right, but why can't you digest it? When food enters the stomach, it will be digested sooner or later. Feng Na said, chew it more carefully. It's better for the stomach to digest and the duodenum to absorb. Li Yundong raised a finger and said, you're only right about one thing. Come, let me ask you again, how does the stomach digest food, and how does the intestine digest food? Feng Na said without hesitation, you don't know? It relies on the gastric juice and the peristalsis of the gastric pouch and intestines. Li Yundong nodded and said, yes, gastric juice can dissolve part of the food, and then digest it through the friction and extrusion of the gastric sac. The same is true for the intestines. But do you know what the stomach works on? Feng Na thought for a moment and said, gastric drive? Li Yundong smiled and said, you've watched too many commercials. Fong Na smiled and asked, "What's that?" She tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then, her eyes lit up and she said, "Yes, I know. It's blood?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. Do you know what blood relies on to move?" She shook her head and said, "I don't know." "Watch net." Li Yundong said, "It's qi. As the saying goes, qi and blood, qi is the commander of blood. A commander without qi would have nowhere to go. Sometimes, people suffer from high blood pressure, heart disease, and other diseases. Most of the time, it's because of a sudden shortness of breath, and blood can't be pumped up, which leads to a sudden attack." Fong Na suddenly said, "Oh, so that's how it is. But does this have anything to do with chewing carefully and swallowing slowly?" Li Yundong still didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "How long can you take a breath?" As he spoke, he demonstrated the action of taking a breath himself. Fong Na followed suit and inhaled until she could no longer inhale. Then, she exhaled. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "Can you inhale endlessly?" Fong Na smiled and said, "How is that possible? Humans can't breathe endlessly." Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. So no matter what a person does, his qi is limited. Your breathing is like this, and so is the qi in your body. When you eat, if the food you chew is coarser, your stomach will have to use more strength to digest it. If your stomach wants to exert strength, it will have to consume more blood and qi. You consume more here, so you use less in other places. And a person's qi is limited. This is called robbing Peter to pay Paul. Many people eat voraciously when they are young, but when they get old, their stomachs have problems. That's the reason." Fong Na widened her eyes and looked at Li Yundong in surprise. She was speechless for a long time. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's wrong? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Fong Na made an obeisance by cupping her hands and said with admiration, "Well, Jinrenli, I really admire you today. You are becoming more and more like a Jinren." In the past, when Su Chan taught people a lesson in public, she said that her medical skills were taught by you. At that time, I was doubtful, but now I'm sure. As she spoke, Fong Na stretched out her palm in front of Li Yundong and said with a smile, "Come on, Jinrenli, let me see a doctor." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you going to see a doctor? Why do I see that you want to have your fortune told?" Fong Na giggled, rolled her eyes, and said with a smile, "Then it's good to have my fortune told." Li Yundong pointed at Fong Na and said with a smile, "Which mountain are you going to worship? You're not sincere at all." But he still pretended to be serious and said, "Do you want to have your career or your marriage read?" Fong Na smiled and said, "Both." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Benefactor, you are too greedy. You are like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. This kind of insincerity won't work." Fong Na curled her lips and said, "Humph, I think it's because you, a fake Taoist, and a real fraud, are not strong enough." This sentence really hit Li Yundong's weak spot. He really didn't know anything about fortune-telling. Li Yundong coughed dryly and changed the topic. "What did you want to talk to me about just now? Tell me first." Fong Na slapped her forehead and said, "Look, I was so confused by your nonsense that I almost forgot." Li Yundong was chewing slowly when he almost spat out a mouthful of rice. "Hey, benefactor, can you pay attention to your wording when you speak?" When Fong Na saw the students around them lowering their heads and snickering, her cheeks turned red, but she refused to admit defeat and said, "It's your own imagination." Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, what's the matter?" She giggled and said, "Actually, it's nothing. It's just that there's a welcome party in a few days, and I want you to join us for a rehearsal. Watch net." Li Yundong immediately waved his hand. "No, no. You haven't become the president of the student union yet. Why should I go? Didn't we agree that I would only go if you became the president?" Fong Na smiled slyly. I will definitely become the president. Don't worry. If you don't come to rehearse, I'm afraid that you will have stage fright when the time comes. Li Yundong laughed. Are you kidding me? I won't have stage fright even if you have stage fright. Feng Na cupped her hands and begged, just do me a favor, please. Although most of the performances in the welcome party are for the freshmen, the older students will also have performances. If our performance is too lousy, we will be laughed at. Li Yundong was most afraid of being begged by beautiful girls like this, especially girls who were close to him. He rubbed his forehead and said helplessly, Hey, tell me what I want to do first. Feng Na giggled. We want to rehearse a short play. Li Yundong said curiously, Oh? That's new. What do you rehearse? Feng Na smiled proudly. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy that I personally choreographed. Li Yundong gasped. Wow. How many hours do you want the audience to watch? That's a bit long. How many generations? Don't tell me it's going to be a lousy work like the second and third generations. Feng Na laughed. Of course it's one generation. Only one generation is the most classic. And it's just one scene. Li Yundong laughed. That's more like it. What scene? Feng Na laughed. The scene where the sword sage takes Zhao Linger away. Then who should I play? Li Yundong asked curiously. As soon as he finished speaking, he became alert. Don't tell me I'm going to play Li Xiaoyao. Feng Na giggled. This is your family. Isn't it better for you to play Li Xiaoyao? Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle drum. No, Li Xiaoyao is such a good-for-nothing. His wife was kidnapped, and his lover was killed as well. In the end, he ended up alone and miserable. He's too useless, too miserable. I'm not going to play him. It's inauspicious. Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle drum. Feng Na snorted. You can't play it even if you want to. This role has long been played by someone else. Li Yundong was relieved. That's good. Who should I play? Feng Na snapped her fingers and said, Who else could it be? With your skills and spirit, of course it's the sword sage. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pointed a finger at his nose. Me, the sword sage? Does that count as a cameo? Feng Na laughed. If it's not a cameo, then what is it? Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You can find anyone to play the role. Feng Na shook her head and said, No, in the whole school, I can see that you are the only one who has the transcendent, aloof, and cold temperament of the sword sage. This kind of temperament can't be acted out. Even the other professionals in the film and performance department don't have this kind of temperament. So, this role must be played by you. Li Yundong touched his cheek and pretended to stroke his beard. He coughed dryly and said, Am I so outstanding? Feng Na kept a straight face and said seriously, You don't have to doubt that I was just flattering you. After that, she burst out laughing. Li Yundong didn't get angry when he heard this. Instead, he laughed out loud. While he was laughing, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. Li Yundong? Li Yundong turned his head and saw Feng Ji, who he had met once before, standing in front of him, looking at him with bright eyes. He stood in a straight line with his knees slightly bent, like a cheetah that would pounce and eat people at any time. Li Yundong frowned secretly and asked, What can I do for you? Feng Ji cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, I heard that your kung fu is good, so I want to compete with you. Li Yundong smiled and said, That's a misconception. I haven't learned kung fu. After that, he turned around and didn't want to talk to the boy. What he said was true. Li Yundong really hadn't learned kung fu from anyone for a day. What he had learned was the way of cultivation. He had used the method of external alchemy to strengthen his body, and then entered the Tao with the method of Naiden. It had nothing to do with kung fu at all. However, Feng Ji didn't believe his words at all. Seeing that Li Yundong had turned around and ignored him, he suddenly became furious, thinking that Li Yundong was looking down on him. He glanced around and saw that most of the students around him were focused on him, especially the freshmen who regarded him as a celestial being. Feng Ji sneered and shouted in a low voice, "Then I'll have to offend you." After that, he jumped up and grabbed Li Yundong's shoulder with his fingers like hooks, /om/. Chapter 212. Can King. Calm. As soon as Feng Ji made his move, Feng Na, who was sitting opposite him, stood up in shock. She saw that Feng Ji's fingers were strong and powerful, grabbing Li Yundong's shoulder like hard iron hooks. She screamed, "Watch out!" Even Feng Na could react, so how could Li Yundong not? He turned sideways, and Feng Ji's fingers grabbed the fan of 7 treasures on his back. Can King. Calm. 7 KOM. Color ** literature _learning %super #speed. Feng Ji only felt that his tentacles were hard, and there was a faint sound of hitting steel. He was surprised and wondering what on earth Li Yundong was carrying on his back when he suddenly saw a burst of light coming from the cloth bag Li Yundong was carrying on his back. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he cursed inwardly, "The fan of 7 treasures has come out to protect its master." In an instant, the cloth behind Li Yundong tore apart with a tearing sound, and the fan of 7 treasures, which was nearly as tall as a man, instantly cut the cloth, wrapping it into countless pieces. It suddenly jumped out of the restraint, and the fan's leaves opened with a swoosh, like a peacock spreading its tail. The fan's leaves rubbed against each other, making the clanging sound of iron. The students in the cafeteria suddenly felt a strong murderous aura coming at them, making them almost unable to breathe. It was as if they had suddenly been placed in an ancient battlefield, surrounded by strong winds. The wind was mixed with the terrible sound of iron rubbing against each other, as if countless soldiers were continuously pulling out their swords and sabers from their waists. After the fan of 7 treasures opened in an instant, its fan's leaves automatically flew at a high speed. Golden Sanskrit characters suddenly burned and jumped up, surrounding the fan of 7 treasures, looking dazzling and solemn. The students around were already dumbfounded, and even Feng Ji was so shocked that he couldn't wrap his head around it. What is this? After the fan of 7 treasures rotated at a high speed, it didn't stop at all and slashed toward Feng Ji. Li Yundong was shocked. He knew that if the fan of 7 treasures hit Feng Ji, he would immediately become a mass of flesh and blood. Being hit by the edge of the fan of 7 treasures rotating at high speed was no different from being hit by an electric saw. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong moved like lightning and accurately pinched the tail of the fan of 7 treasures. He lowered his waist and exerted his strength fiercely, trying to stop the fan from slashing forward. Seeing that the edge of the fan was about to hit Feng Ji, he let out a loud shout, turned his waist, and spun his feet. He suddenly changed the force of the straight slash into a diagonal slash. The psychic fan of 7 treasures brushed past Feng Ji's cheek and shoulder and slashed over. Watch net. Feng Ji only felt a gust of wind whistling past his ears as if countless swords and sabers were slashing down from beside him. He was so frightened that he didn't dare to make any movements, fearing that he would be chopped into pieces if he moved even a little. After Li Yundong changed the direction of the fan of 7 treasures, he spun his feet again and twisted his waist fiercely. Taking advantage of the falling force of the fan of 7 treasures, he forcefully swung the fan backward. Then, with the movement of swinging the fan, he forcibly closed all the fan leaves with a swoosh. From the slash of the fan of 7 treasures to Li Yundong's grasp, twist, and swing, these lightning-fast moves were so fast that no one could see them clearly. There were even residual shadows of the burning golden characters in the air, like the effects of a special effect in a movie. It was dazzling and shocking. After the last sound of the fan blades rubbing against each other, all the people in the cafeteria suddenly felt that the whistling sound in the air had disappeared in the blink of an eye, and the residual shadows of the burning golden characters in the air also slowly disappeared. They all sat or stood, staring at Li Yundong blankly, unable to say a word, as if they had all been frozen in place. It wasn't until Li Yundong slammed the fan of 7 treasures on the ground with a thud, causing their bodies to shake and their feet to go numb, that they came to their senses as if they had just woken up from a dream. Feng Ji looked at Li Yundong in astonishment. His eyes widened, and his eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. He stammered, "Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong looked at Feng Ji with unkind eyes, and he was furious in his heart. Although his temperament was slowly becoming calm and tolerant, it didn't mean that he could tolerate things to a certain extent, especially just now. If he hadn't acted quickly, Feng Ji would have been automatically killed by the fan of 7 treasures. It didn't matter if he died, but he had used a magical item to kill someone before he had passed the heavenly tribulation. Wouldn't a bolt of lightning strike him immediately? If he died, what would happen to Su Chan? Li Yundong snorted coldly. His voice was so dull that it sounded like a clap of thunder in the clouds. Everyone in the cafeteria felt a sharp pain in their chests, as if someone had punched them. As a freshman, I think it's better for you to behave yourself. Don't overestimate yourself. After that, he didn't even have the mood to eat. He carried the fan of 7 treasures and strode out. Watch net. 7:ko/ For a moment, the cafeteria was frighteningly quiet. Although it was full of people, there was not even a cough. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. It was not until he left that the cafeteria became lively again. The students were in an uproar. F***ck, what happened just now? Too awesome, too shocking, it's like watching a computer CG, too strong. So he's been carrying a huge black iron fan on his back all this time. F***ck, Dawn also used this in Fortress Besieged in October. However, the iron fan he used was simply tragic compared to the one Li Yundong was using. It's so lame. F***ck, the ground was smashed by this iron fan. How heavy is this fan? I guess it's at least dozens or hundreds of kilograms, right? It looks like it's made of pure steel. Strong, it's too strong. The students were talking excitedly, but suddenly, there was an ear-piercing crack on the table next to Feng Ji, who was in a daze. Then, with a bang, the stone table made of marble suddenly broke into 2 pieces and collapsed. The cafeteria was quiet again in an instant, and then in a few seconds, it was boiling again. The roof of the cafeteria was almost blown off. F***ck, that's too much. What's going on? F***ck, it seems that the blades of the iron fan were cut off when it was spinning like a wheel. F***ck, this is even more exaggerated than in the movies. The seniors were discussing excitedly, and the freshmen were all dumbfounded, unable to believe their eyes. Some of them finally understood why the seniors in this school worshipped Li Yundong like a god and regarded him as a unique legendary figure in the school. It turns out that he's really a legendary figure. F***ck, that was too exaggerated, wasn't it? F***ck, I said bad things about him. I offended him. I won't be finished after 4 years in college, will I? Should I transfer to another school? As the freshmen were talking, the seniors took the opportunity to give them advice. You are young and ignorant. Jinrenli won't argue with you. Jinrenli? Yes, don't you know that Li Yundong has a sect in this school? What? Li Yundong has a sect here? What sect? I want to join. The Divine Fist sect. Benefactor, do you want to join? It's very simple. As long as you fill in this form and pay the entrance fee of 200 yuan, you can become an apprentice of Jinrenli. At that time, we will all be brothers. Your parents will be my parents, your brothers will be my brothers, and your wife will be my wife. F***ck off, monk. Jinrenli is a Taoist master. You, monk, get out of here. What Divine Fist sect? Didn't you hear at the school gate last time that there was a Divine Fist sect in this world? And it's in Kowloon, Hong Kong. People might sue you for infringement. Ahem, fellow Taoist, don't listen to that monk's nonsense. I am the chief disciple of Zhenrenli. I have full authority to accept disciples on behalf of Zhenrenli. May I ask, do I have to pay the entrance fee? Of course not. Our sect doesn't need to pay any entrance fee. You just need to give out a PP and report your 3 measurements before joining. Well, my 3 measurements are 36D, 25, 36. Can I join? What? 36D. Yes, yes. Of course, there is milk, ahem, big. I'm 32B, 25, 34. Can I join? What? 32B, no, no. Boy, you'd better drink more papaya milk tea. Look at you, you're as thin as a pencil. Why not? I protest. You're judging people by their breasts. You're discriminating. You're not respecting human rights. Student, flat-chested people have no human rights. Next. F*CK, pervert, what's your name? How dare you flirt with a girl in public? Amitba, I'm Li Yi. Benefactor, what do you want to do? Beware of the many Christian brothers behind me, or Allah will punish you. F*CK, you don't even know which religion you belong to. No wonder you were locked up. How did you get out? Brothers, catch him and send him to the police station. The cafeteria was a mess of porridge. Feng Na glanced at the dumbfounded Feng Ji, then grabbed her bag and chased after Li Yundong. Hey, wait for me. Feng Na chased after him and ran a few steps. She had just finished her meal and was panting a little after running for a few steps. Li Yundong stopped, turned around, and looked at her. He said helplessly, Miss, what can I do for you? Feng Na said, tomorrow afternoon, there will be a rehearsal in the school auditorium. Remember to come. Li Yundong said with a wry smile, are you sure you want me? Forget it, I'm afraid of you. I'll go. Only then did Feng Na feel relieved. She smiled and said, I know you're a gentleman. You never go back on your word. Li Yundong waved his hand and said, all right, don't flatter me. I'll do what I promised you. With that, he turned around and left with the fan of 7 treasures. Feng Na stood rooted to the spot, staring blankly at Li Yundong's receding figure. She didn't know why, but she suddenly had a feeling in her heart that she had never known or understood the boy in front of her. Ever since she first saw him in the Taekwondo club, he had been slowly drifting away from her, away from the familiar world around her. Feng Na thought of the shocking scene that had happened in the canteen and couldn't help but sigh/om/. Chapter 213. Go to the internet. After Li Yundong left the cafeteria, Feng Ji, who was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a long time, came to his senses. Ignoring the noisy students around him, he took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. He whispered, Shixiang, I'm no match for him. Well, this guy seems to be an inner disciple. Well, I see. After hanging up the phone, Feng Ji's eyes flickered for a while, and then he left the cafeteria. Go to the internet. 7KOM. At the same time, when Li Yundong caused another big trouble in the school cafeteria, Su Chan had already returned to the foot of the mountain of the Fox Zen school with her master. Su Chan clearly remembered that she had left the sect for as long as she could remember. She only vaguely remembered that there were several Shibua and Shiji in the sect, but she couldn't remember their appearances and figures clearly. Su Chan knew that she was the youngest junior of the Fox Zen school. This time, she was afraid that she would have to call everyone elder or senior. She couldn't help but feel a little timid. She hid behind Ao Wushuang and didn't dare to come out. Although Ao Wushuang knew what her disciple was thinking, she was not in the mood to coax her. When she thought that her sect was about to be in trouble, she was very anxious. When she reached the top of the mountain, she rushed all the way to the mountainside. Not all the temples and Taoist temples in the world were built on the top of the mountain. Most of them were built on the mountainside. Ao Wushuang walked quickly all the way. The dense jungle around her was blooming with flowers. Many tourists stopped to watch on the bluestone road, but she was not interested in looking at them. The little fox also followed her step by step. Her eyes were rolling, and she looked around curiously and timidly. In her impression, these things seemed to be very familiar, but also very strange. Halfway up the mountain, a corner of a Taoist gate was faintly revealed in the dense forest. When Ao Wushuang saw it, she immediately became spirited and went up to greet it. Su Chan had always felt very strange. In her opinion, her sect was called the Fox Zen School. Since it had the word Zen in it, and the sect was established under the guidance of Zen Master Baizhang, and her grandmaster had mostly practiced Buddhist cultivation methods back then, why had her sect become a Taoist sect now? Su Chan had thought about this question before, but every time she asked, Ao Wushuang would always say, "You're still young. You don't understand these things until you grow up." To watch the net. 7 KOM. Color ** literature _learning% super #fast. Now, Su Chan couldn't help but tug at the corner of Ao Wushuang's clothes and ask, "Master, shouldn't our Fox Zen school belong to the Buddhist school? Why do you live in a Taoist temple?" Ao Wushuang patted Su Chan's hand, which was holding the corner of her clothes, and said, "It's a long story. I'll tell you later." Su Chan couldn't help pouting and muttering in a low voice, "I knew it would be this sentence again." Ao Wushuang ignored her and knocked on the door. After a while, the wooden door opened with a creak. A beautiful Taoist nun walked out from the left and right side of the door. When the Taoist nun saw Ao Wushuang, she was stunned. "What can I do for you?" Ao Wushuang glanced at her and walked inside. "Where is Lu Yi? Go and tell him that I'm back." When the Taoist nun saw that Ao Wushuang had not announced her name and had directly called her leader by his name, as well as barging in without permission, she was shocked and angry. She blocked her way and said coldly, "Who are you? Tell me your name." Ao Wushuang looked the Taoist nun up and down and saw that she didn't look like a fox spirit. Moreover, the red pill in her body had been broken and she had lost her virginity. She was wearing a Taoist robe, but her face was covered with heavy makeup. She was dressed in a coquettish manner and had changed into fashionable clothes. Ao Wushuang knew that she must be an outer disciple. She immediately sneered and said, "You, an outer disciple, don't deserve to know my name." The Taoist nun sneered and retorted, "It's true that I'm an outer disciple, but who do you think you are? How dare you break into the Taoist mansion? How dare you?" Ao Wushuang raised her head and laughed. "I can come and go as I please. It was the same 10 years ago, and it's the same now. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Hurry up and get out of my way." After that, Ao Wushuang flicked her sleeve and a strong wind blew past. The Taoist nun flew a few meters away and hit the wall. Then, she slowly slid down like a picture. Although Ao Wushuang's move looked fierce, in fact, she used a strong and gentle force. She put the Taoist nun on the wall, but let her fall slowly. She was not injured, showing her excellent kung fu. Go and look at the net. However, as an outer disciple, the Taoist nun didn't know the trick at all. She immediately shouted, "Someone is here. Someone is trespassing and beating people." As soon as she finished shouting, a dozen Taoist nuns in Taoist robes rushed out of the Taoist temple. Some were holding horsetail whisks, some were holding long swords, and some were holding ame daggers. They surrounded Ao Wushuang, and one of them shouted angrily, "Who dares to be so arrogant here? Are you tired of living?" Ao Wushuang glanced at these people coldly. She didn't take them seriously at all. She sneered and said, "A group of people who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Who is your master? Shout out, lest you say that I'm bullying the weak later." When the Taoist nun who had been released by Ao Wushuang saw that many of her companions had come, she felt confident and said arrogantly, "I think you are the one who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know what kind of place this is? Tell me your name, lest you say that we are bullying the weak later. Ao Wushuang raised her head and laughed arrogantly. Do you think you can win by bullying the weak with more people? Do you think you are in a club? It's ridiculous. Choner, go up and teach them a lesson. Otherwise, when someone comes later, they will say that I'm bullying the weak. Su Chan had always been a bold and heartless person. At this time, with the support of her master, she immediately giggled and replied crisply, "Yes, master." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke and rushed toward the Taoist nuns. The Taoist nuns only felt their vision blur, and then their hands went numb. The weapons in their hands fell unconsciously, but they didn't fall to the ground. In the blink of an eye, they were taken away by Su Chan. By the time they reacted, Su Chan had already returned to Ao Wushuang's side. She was holding a lot of horsetail whisks, long swords, ame thorns, and other instruments in her hands, looking at them with a smile. The Taoist nuns were shocked and angry. They stood where they were and were disarmed before they could resist. They shouted angrily, "Damn it, what's going on? F***ck your grandmother, what's the point of sneak attack? Hey, give me back my weapons. You little bitch, if you have the ability, come here openly." They cursed for a while, and Ao Wushuang frowned. She rolled up her sleeves and shouted angrily, "A group of bastards, what did your master teach you? Today, I may have to teach you a good lesson on behalf of your master." When the Taoist nuns who had been released by Ao Wushuang saw that Ao Wushuang and her disciples were powerful, they immediately sat on the ground and began to scold like a shrew. "Come on, someone is bullying us. They are going to kill us. They are going to kill us." Ao Wushuang was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. She thought to herself, "I haven't been back to the sect for 10 years. Why has it become a place to hide evil? What's wrong with the leader?" Su Chan also widened her eyes and thought to herself, "Is this how my fellow disciples are? It can't be, right? This is clearly a group of shrews." Just as the two of them were stunned, they suddenly saw a figure flying quickly from the mountain. A blue light flashed, and a figure stood in the Taoist courtyard. This person was about 1.78 meters tall, with a bun on his head. He was dressed in a Taoist robe and carried a sword on his back. He had an extraordinary temperament and an immortal aura. When the Taoist nuns saw this person appear, they all went up to him with joy and shouted, "Master, a bad person is bullying us. Shirbua, you have to stand up for us." When the Taoist saw so many women rushing towards him, he immediately showed a distressed and happy expression. "Oh, my little girls, what's going on?" The Taoist nuns pointed their fingers at Ao Wushuang and said, "It's her. She's bullying us." Then they pointed at Su Chan and said, "And her. She stole our weapons." The Taoist looked in the direction of the finger and was shocked. "Ao Wushuang? Why are you back?" His gaze fell on Su Chan, and there was a burst of strange and greedy light in his eyes. He said in surprise, "Is this Su Chan?" Su Chan felt uncomfortable being stared at by the Taoist priest and subconsciously shrank behind Ao Wushuang. The Taoist priest showed a kind expression and said to Su Chan, "The last time I saw you, you were still a little girl. I didn't expect you to become so big now." Su Chan asked Ao Wushuang in a low voice, "Master, who is he?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "You have to remember that this is the most useless second Shirbua of our Fox Zen school, Gu Feng." Gu Feng smiled bitterly and said, "Little Shimmy, I haven't seen you for 10 years, but you haven't changed at all. Your mouth is still so unforgiving." Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and said, "You haven't changed at all, have you? You're still so greedy and lecherous." A trace of anger flashed through Gu Feng's eyes, but he was still smiling. "Why do you say that?" Ao Wushuang glanced at the stunned Taoist nuns and said, "What's wrong with these people? How did you discipline your disciple?" As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a cold snort. "My disciple is also here." Why, little shimmy, do you want to teach me a lesson too? Ao Wushuang looked around and saw a beautiful young woman in a Taoist robe with a sawtooth iron wheel on her back. She immediately frowned and said to Su Chan, "This is your seventh Shibwa, Yi Yu." After that, she said coldly to Yi Yu, "Seventh Shibwa, how have you been?" Although Yi Yu was actually quite old, she looked no different from a 17 or 18-year-old girl. She had a fiery temper and was extremely protective. She snorted coldly and said angrily, "Ao Wushuang, don't be hypocritical. You haven't come back for 10 years and caused such a big trouble outside. It's fine if you harm our sect, but as soon as you come back, you bully my disciple." "What do you mean? Do you still have me in your eyes?" After that, Yi Yu looked at Su Chan and sneered. "You did it just now, didn't you? Very good, very good. Come here and let me see how much of your master's skills you have learned." Su Chan was shocked and quickly shrank behind Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang quietly blocked Su Chan behind her and sneered. "Shiji, what's the point of bullying a junior?" Yi Yu sneered and said, "Didn't you just bully my disciple? Get out of the way, or I'll beat you up too. You were no match for me 10 years ago. Do you think I'm afraid of you now?" Ao Wushuang sneered. The 3-foot-long Bahuang sword hidden behind her jumped out with a clang and automatically surrounded Ao Wushuang as if to protect its master. It let out a sword cry like a dragon's roar. For a moment, the sword chi in the courtyard was everywhere, and the wind was blowing. When Yi Yu saw the Bahuang sword, she was shocked and angry. "He actually gave this sword to you. Well, you really colluded with the Zhengyi school. No wonder Yan Feng of the Linggong sect came to ask for a punitive expedition 9 years ago. Tell me, did you deliberately lead these disasters to the sect?" After she finished speaking, the chainsaw Vajra wheel behind her jumped out and rotated quickly. It also let out a harsh and sharp buzzing sound, provoking the Bahuang sword not to be outdone. For a moment, these two treasures were challenging each other in the air. The sword chi in the Taoist Academy soared into the sky and was full of murderous intent. Su Chan looked at the field with a dumbfounded expression and said in her heart, "No way, as soon as he came back, he actually started fighting by himself? Is there a mistake? /om/" Chapter 214. Go to watch net. Ao Wushuang was the youngest shimmy of the Fox Zen school. She was the youngest of the older generation, but she had the highest aptitude and the highest spiritual energy. She was the top master of the Fox Zen school. Watch net. 7 KOM. In addition, she had been arrogant and rebellious since she was a child. She had once risked universal condemnation and fell in love with the leader of the Linggong sect of the Zhengyi school. Because of this, she had fallen out with all her fellow disciples and was expelled from the sect 10 years ago. 10 years later, when she came back, she had caused a lot of trouble. The other people in the sect naturally had a lot of ideas about her. As the second most powerful master of the Fox Zen school, Yi Yu was even more upset. When Ao Wushuang was not there, she was the number 1 master, and everyone had to look up to her. But when Ao Wushuang came back, she was going to be the second. Who could stand it? Ao Wushuang had always been indifferent to everyone in the sect. She was as cold as ice, even to her Shiji. Yi Yu felt that Ao Wushuang was arrogant because of her talent. She looked down on her Shiji just because her spiritual power was higher than hers. Therefore, she had always been holding back her anger in her heart and wanted to surpass Ao Wushuang. Now that there was such a good opportunity, how could Yi Yu let it go? She was furious and immediately threw the danger of the enemy to the back of her mind. She would solve her personal grievances first. Seeing that a fight was about to break out, Su Chan subconsciously shouted, "Don't fight." As soon as she said that, everyone's eyes immediately turned to her. Yi Yu sneered and said, "Who do you think you are? Is it your turn to speak here?" Yi Yu was very protective, but Ao Wushuang was even more protective than her. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "She is my disciple. Why can't she speak? Yi Yu was furious. She pointed her finger, and the chainsaw Vajra suddenly buzzed loudly. The surrounding air was trembling, and the sand and stones on the ground were flying. The momentum was terrifying. Ao Wushuang snorted coldly, and the Bahuang sword around her suddenly flew into the air with a swoosh. It looked down at the chainsaw Vajra from above. The sword edge trembled, and in an instant, it split from one sword into two, two into four, and four into eight. In a short time, it turned into a steel lotus throne made entirely of sword edges. The lotus leaves were turning one by one, like countless saw teeth, which was very frightening. Seeing that the two of them were about to fight in the next second, an extremely gentle voice suddenly rang out, flowing through everyone's hearts like a clear spring. Sigh, we're all from the same sect, why do we have to fight each other? Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw a woman in a white Taoist robe with a transparent gauze draped over her shoulders slowly descending from the sky. This woman was extremely beautiful. Her black hair was slanted, and there was a golden hairpin in her black hair. Although she was also a member of the Fox Zen school, she was beautiful and dignified, like a bodhisattva standing on the ground. Her face was solemn and dignified, which made people respect her. Go to see. As soon as Yi Yu saw the woman, she immediately stopped and nodded to her. Eldest Shiji. Su Chan stared at the woman and couldn't help asking Ao Wushuang in a low voice, Master, is this eldest Shiji? Ao Wushuang nodded. Yes, this is your eldest Shiji, Mo Ashi. Su Chan exclaimed, Eldest Shiji looks like a bodhisattva. There was a rare hint of admiration in Ao Wushuang's eyes. She said, Eldest Shiji also cultivates Vajra Buddhism, so she looks solemn and has the bearing of a bodhisattva. Although Mo Ashi's appearance was no different from that of a young woman in her 20s, her bearing made people feel that she was like an immovable bodhisattva in the world. As soon as she appeared, everyone present bowed to her in unison. After a while, several beautiful women in various costumes flew over. Ao Wushuang said in a low voice, This is your third Shibwa Zhuang Yiting, fourth Shibwa Zhang Sun Hong, fifth Shibwa Lu Yuehong, and sixth Shibwa Chao Yi. Su Chan looked at them one by one, and finally, her eyes fell on Mo Ashi. Mo Ashi looked at Su Chan with a kind smile on her face, and then said to Ao Wushuang, Little Shiji, you're back. If there was anyone in the Fox Zen school who could make Ao Wushuang feel some respect, it would be eldest Shiji Mo Ashi, except for Lu Yi, the head of the school. She raised one hand and nodded slightly, which could be regarded as a greeting. Eldest Shiji, how have you been? Mo Ashi smiled and said, I'm fine. It's good that you're back. As she said this, she turned to look at Yi Yu and said softly, Shiji, when the school is in danger, can't we talk about it later? Aren't you making your friends suffer and your enemies happy? Yi Yu glanced at Ao Wushuang with a sneer. Is she also a relative? Humph. Why are you talking about me and not her? Although she refused to admit defeat, she waved her hand and took back the chakram. After that, she ignored the others and turned to leave. Ao Wushuang didn't wave her hand. In an instant, the countless Bahuang swords turned into one, and then flew behind Ao Wushuang in the blink of an eye, as if they had never appeared. Mo Ashi glanced at Ao Wushuang and said with a smile, I haven't seen you for 10 years. Little Shiji's cultivation has improved again. Ao Wushuang smiled faintly. Not at all. I'm just standing still. But eldest Shiji's cultivation has increased a lot. Mo Ashi sighed softly and said, I'm sorry to make you laugh. After that, she said to the people around her, let's go. Then she nodded to Ao Wushuang and Su Chan and said, come with me. Su Chan followed Ao Wushuang and Mo Ashi into the Taoist temple. When they walked to an antique sandalwood door, Mo Ashi said to the two of them, the leader is waiting for you inside. You can go in by yourself. Go to the net. After that, she smiled at Su Chan and Ao Wushuang and left gracefully. Su Chan followed closely behind Ao Wushuang and entered the room. She saw Lu Yi, the leader of the school, sitting on a futon and smoking a water pipe. Lu Yi was not surprised to see the two of them come in. He pointed at the stool with the cigarette butt and said, "You're here? Sit down." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "Leader, what's wrong with the outer disciples of our Fox Zen school? Why are their qualities so low?" Lu Yi smiled and said, "You don't know how expensive it is if you're not in charge. Besides, although I'm the leader in name, in fact, it's your eldest Shiji, Mo Ashi, who's in charge. If you have anything to say, go to her." Ao Wushuang snorted. She sat for a while with a cold face and asked, "Where is my room?" Lu Yi pointed in a direction with the cigarette butt and said, "It's 20 meters away from here." Ao Wushuang immediately got up, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. Su Chan was looking around curiously. Seeing her master get up and leave, she followed. When Ao Wushuang came to the room, she took a casual look and said, "Which one do you live in?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said, "I live in the inner one." Ao Wushuang nodded. Her temper was sometimes cold and sometimes hot. She pulled over a futon and began to meditate and practice qi, regardless of whether Su Chan was idle or not. After staring at Ao Wushuang for a while, Su Chan sat at the square table in boredom and held her chin with her elbow. She muttered to herself, "I thought that when I and my master came back to help the sect through the difficulties, we would be welcomed like heroes, but I didn't expect it to be like this. What a disappointment." Su Chan couldn't help but look around the room. She found a simple mahogany bed, a simple square table, a few mahogany stools, and a few rush cushions on the floor. Apart from that, there was nothing else in the room. Su Chan couldn't help complaining in her heart, "It's so boring. There's no soap opera to watch, no computer to surf the internet, and no delicious food. If only Yundong were here." Thinking of Yundong, the little girl couldn't help but miss him. For a moment, her mind began to wander, and she couldn't help glancing at her master. She rolled her eyes and said, "Master, I'll go to the sect and have a look around." Ao Wushuang snorted coldly. "You can go if you're not afraid of being bullied by others." Su Chan giggled and said, "I have my master to support me. I'm not afraid." Although Ao Wushuang didn't open her eyes, there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. She scolded with a smile, "You're glib. Go ahead. Don't be naughty." Su Chan said coquettishly, "Master, I'm not young anymore." After that, she skipped out of the door. After going out, Su Chan ran straight to the room of Lu Yi, the leader of the sect. She ran to the door, but for a moment, she didn't dare to go in. She just poked her head out of the door and looked at Lu Yi, who was smoking a hookah. At first, Lu Yi deliberately pretended not to see Su Chan, but later, when he saw that Su Chan was really pitiful, he couldn't help laughing. "Well, little girl, don't hide there. What do you want from me? You must not have come to the temple for nothing." Su Chan giggled, jumped in front of Lu Yi, the leader of the sect, and said coquettishly, "Grandmaster, the paper crane I saw you with last time was very fun. Can you give me one to play with?" Lu Yi knocked on the hookah and said with a smile, "How did you know that the paper crane was mine?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said slyly, "I didn't know at first, but now I know." "You devil." Lu Yi chuckled and spread out his palm. A paper crane the size of a fist flew toward Su Chan. Su Chan was overjoyed and immediately grabbed it in her hand. She was overjoyed and said, "Does it mean that it can go wherever I tell it to go?" Lu Yi glanced at Su Chan and said, "Yes, it's the same as when you use a magical item." Su Chan held the paper crane as if it was a treasure, as if she was afraid that sect leader Lu Yi would go back again. She turned around and ran out. After running out, she turned around and said with a smile, "Sect leader Grandmaster, thank you. You are a good person." Lu Yi chuckled and watched Su Chan's figure disappear at the door, revealing a meaningful smile. Su Chan returned to her room with the paper crane in her hand. When she passed by her master's room, she was careful and did not dare to breathe too much, as if she was afraid of waking up her master. It was not until she returned to her room that she closed the door tightly and let go of the paper crane on the table. As soon as she let go, the paper crane flew out with a whoosh. It twisted its neck and flapped its wings, as if it was uncomfortable being held by Su-chan just now. Su-chan found a pen and moved closer to the paper crane with a smile. She whispered, "Little sweetheart, don't move. I'll write a few words on your body. Help me pass a message to Yundong." Seeing that Su-chan was about to write on its body with a pen, the paper crane immediately spread its wings and was about to escape. Su-chan was quick and grabbed it. "You want to run?" "No way." The paper crane was caught by Su-chan. Seeing that the tip of the pen was getting closer and closer, it couldn't help struggling. Su-chan saw that it was struggling so hard that she couldn't write, so she couldn't help saying, "Don't move. Just write a few strokes." After that, she suddenly had an idea and said, I know. You can't write on your body, right?" The paper crane seemed to understand her words and actually nodded its head. Su-chan giggled. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" She thought for a moment, found a piece of paper, wrote a sentence on it, and then put it in the body of the paper crane. She tapped the head of the paper crane with her finger and said, "Hey, you don't want me to write on your body, so I put a note on it. If you lose it for me, hum." After that, Su-chan made a very fierce gesture of tearing the paper. The paper crane was so scared that it shrank its head. Su-chan said, "Alas, my phone was also confiscated by my master. Otherwise, I wouldn't have looked for an unreliable guy like you. Forget it, now fly to Yundong's side for me. Remember, don't lose the note." After she finished speaking, Jiha looked around with a blank look on her face. Su-chan couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, why are you in a daze? Hurry up." The paper crane raised its head to look at Su-chan and shook its head vigorously. Su-chan said angrily, "Why don't you want to go?" Then, she grabbed it with both hands, wanting to ravage it. The paper crane was so scared that it struggled hard again. Su-chan saw that it was struggling so hard that the note fell off. She couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, do you have to be so scared?" As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly thought, "Oh, right, I haven't told it where to go yet." Su-chan patted her forehead. "I'm so stupid." After that, she leaned over to the paper crane and told it the address. Then, she affectionately patted its head and said, "Now you know where it is? Hurry up." The paper crane was afraid of being tossed around by Su-chan, so it quickly spread its wings and flew away. With a whoosh, it disappeared out of the window. Su-chan looked in the direction where the paper crane had gone and couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. "I wonder how Yundong will react when he sees my note. Will he miss me? What will he write back to me?" Just as the little girl was thinking about the sweetness, she couldn't help but reveal a knowing smile on her face. However, when she gradually retracted her infatuated gaze, she swept her gaze across the table and suddenly saw a note with words written on it lying alone on the table. Su-chan's eyes suddenly went blank. She wanted to shout, but she was afraid that her master would hear her, so she couldn't help but gnash her teeth and whisper to the window, "Hey, idiot, you didn't bring the note. Come back, /om/." Chapter 2:15. Go to watch net. But the paper crane had already flown far away. How could Su-chan call it back? The little girl was so depressed that she wanted to fly out and chase the paper crane back. But as soon as this idea came to her mind, she heard Ao Wushuang say from the next room, "Chaner, what did you just say?" Su-chan immediately replied embarrassedly, "No, nothing, master." After that, she sat down on her bed gloomily, hugged her knees with her hands, and rested her chin on them. She couldn't help complaining to herself, Su-chan, you are so stupid. It's not easy for you to get a paper crane. Now it's all over. When Yundong gets it, how will he know that I gave it to him?" But after thinking about this, she couldn't help comforting herself. Well, maybe Yundong will understand when he sees it. He should have this tacit understanding with me. While she was thinking about this with resentment, Li Yundong had just returned from class in Tiannan City with the psychic fan of 7 treasures on his back. Go to watch net. The latest movies, TV series, and variety shows were all there. As his cultivation deepened, Li Yundong gradually understood the meaning and true meaning of cultivation. Gradually, he began to no longer rely on the car as a means of transportation, but more on his own legs. Whether it was going to school or getting off school, he would run back with his legs carrying the psychic fan of 7 treasures, which weighed more than 50 kilograms. Along the way, he paid attention to adjusting the qi in his body. It could be said that he was cultivating all the time. When he returned home, he opened the door with the key. As soon as he entered the door, he smelled a fragrance. Li Yundong looked around curiously and saw 2 dishes on the table. Li Yundong took a look and saw that the first dish was a vegetable platter stir-fried with celery, lilies, corn kernels, and asparagus. There was no oil in it, and a thin layer of starch juice was poured over it, making it look crystal clear. In addition, these dishes were arranged in a beautiful fan shape. The colors of each dish were clearly layered, making it look beautiful and delicious. It was impossible for a chef to make such a dish. Li Yundong laughed. He didn't even need to look to know that it must have been Zi Yuan who had cooked the dishes. He shouted in the dining room, "Hey, is it a holiday today? The eldest senior sister of the Linggong sect of the Zhuni school is cooking in person?" After a while, Zi Yuan came out of the kitchen wearing an apron, holding a soup bowl in her hand. Li Yundong glanced at it and saw that it was a bowl of white fish soup. From a few meters away, Li Yundong could smell the strong aroma of fish, which made him want to eat it. Li Yundong chuckled and said, "So rich? What happened? Why is it so grand?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "You have just begun to practice your magical powers, so you shouldn't focus your attention on trivial matters. Moreover, the divine tribulation will come at any time. You should concentrate all your time on cultivation. Watch net. So, I'll help you with these trivial matters." Li Yundong put away his school bag in the fan of 7 treasures, washed his hands, and walked over to the dining table. "Do I have to pay you?" Zi Yuan took off the apron in front of her and said with a smile, "Can you afford it?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "How can I afford to hire a fairy like you as a nanny? If I do that, my life will be shortened." As he spoke, he pulled Zi Yuan's seat away. After she was seated, he went to serve the rice himself and said, "Come on, sit down. I'll go get the rice. If I let a fairy like you go in and out of the kitchen and let others see you, they will say that I don't know how to show mercy to women." Zi Yuan looked at his figure bending over to serve the rice, and a gentle smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Are you always so glib to girls?" she asked. Li Yundong filled the bowl with rice and placed it in front of Zi Yuan. He cried out in grievance, "How can I do that? I'm just talking about the matter as it stands. You think too much." Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong, her eyes fixed and a little complicated. After a while, she sighed in her heart. There is nothing wrong with the world, and people are just making trouble for themselves. Li Yundong, you should know that all people in this world are actually mediocre. Sometimes, they don't know how to tell whether you are heartless or affectionate. But she didn't say this out loud. She just lowered her head and ate her food silently. Zi Yuan was a person who paid great attention to rules. She didn't talk when she was eating, and she didn't talk when she was sleeping. According to Li Yundong's observation, even every step she took seemed to be the same size, as if she had deliberately measured it with a ruler. Except for a few times when she lost control of her emotions and had some normal reactions, most of the time, she looked like a fairy who had descended to the world. Li Yundong chewed and swallowed slowly. He was about to get up to clean up when he heard a knocking sound coming from the window connecting the living room and the balcony. Li Yundong walked over curiously and saw a paper crane beating the French window with its wings as if it were alive. What's going on? Li Yundong opened the door curiously. As soon as the door opened, the paper crane flew into his palm. The paper crane shook its body as if it was trying to shake something out, but after shaking for a while, there was no movement. It turned its head to look at its body, and suddenly, its whole body trembled. Then, its whole body began to tremble. Li Yundong looked at the paper crane, which seemed to be psychic, and suddenly found it interesting. He asked curiously, "Where did you come from?" The paper crane raised its head and looked at him. It was in a daze for a while, then pointed out the window with its wings. "Go to see." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Someone sent you here?" The paper crane nodded quickly. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly asked, "Did Chick send you here?" The paper crane didn't know who Chick was. It was at a loss for a while, staying in Li Yundong's palm, not knowing how to react. Li Yundong smiled very confidently. "Yes, you must have been sent here by Chick. Wait here, I'll write a note." As he said this, he went into the room and wrote a note. Then, he put it in the body of the paper crane and said, "Go, take this back with you." This time, the paper crane carefully looked behind it. After making sure that the note was still there, it spread its wings and flew away with a whoosh. Su Chan was waiting anxiously in the room. While she was pacing around, she suddenly saw a white shadow flash by. The paper crane flew back. Su Chan immediately rushed over and grabbed it. She gritted her teeth and said, "You idiot! You bastard! You ran away without a note. Do you want to piss me off?" The poor paper crane was almost out of shape by Su Chan. It struggled hard, its head shaking, and kept pointing at its back with its wings. Su Chan glanced at it and was surprised to find that there was a note in it. She let go of the paper crane and opened the note. It was Li Yundong's familiar handwriting. "Chick, is that you?" Su Chan was so happy that her chest almost exploded. She subconsciously wanted to let out an excited scream, but as soon as the sound reached her throat, it was abruptly stopped. She covered her mouth with her palm, as if trying to stop the sound from coming out. After a while, the girl nervously glanced through the crack of the door at her master outside. Seeing that she was still quietly meditating, she was relieved. Su Chan's eyes turned into crescent moons. She held the note with both hands as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. She was full of joy and thought, "Yundong is Yundong. He guessed it was me. Hee hee." She giggled at the note for a while, then suddenly remembered something. "Oh, I was too happy and forgot to reply." She quickly rushed to the table, picked up a pen, and wrote a note. Then, she stuffed the note into the body of the paper crane and whispered kindly, "Good girl, I misunderstood you just now. I'm sorry." The poor paper crane was trying to smooth out the wrinkles on its body caused by Su Chan's pinching with its mouth and wings. It raised its head, as if it was too angry to ignore Su Chan and proposed to go on strike. Su Chan suddenly said angrily, "If you don't fly over quickly, I'll tear you apart." The paper crane was shocked. It looked at Su Chan with its head shrunk, and finally flew out helplessly. The speed of the paper crane was extremely fast. Li Yundong only felt that he had waited for about half an hour before the paper crane flew back. Li Yundong was overjoyed. He held the paper crane, took out the note and glanced at it. It was indeed a letter from Su Chan. He suppressed his ecstasy and read it word by word. "Master, you are so smart. You know it's a chick at a glance. I forgot to put a note in it just now. You won't blame me for being stupid, will you? By the way, I'm going back to the sect with my master now. You don't have to worry about me. How about you? How are you?" Li Yundong smiled and wrote a few lines on the back of the note, then clipped it to the back of the paper crane and told it to take it back. Li Yundong watched as the paper crane flapped its wings and flew away. He felt that in this era of the explosion of the internet, it was quite interesting for him and Su Chan to send a letter from thousands of miles away. When Su Chan received the paper crane, she couldn't wait to take out the note. It read, of course. I told you that our hearts are connected. Your master has already succeeded in the Zhuji phase. Once I pass the heavenly tribulation, I'll come and pick you up. From then on, you can travel the world and laugh at the Jianghu. Su Chan read the note over and over again. She was so happy that she felt like her heart was about to explode. After a while, she picked up the pen and wrote a few lines on the note, but she felt unsatisfied, so she crushed it and threw it aside. She picked up the pen again and wrote a few more lines. She looked at it again and again, but still felt unsatisfied, so she threw it away. She repeated this a few times, and the room was filled with paper scraps. Finally, Su Chan smiled mischievously and wrote over and over again, Master, if you continue my next sentence, I'll believe that our hearts are connected. At this point, Su Chan wanted to write the first half of a poem, but just as she was about to start writing, she suddenly thought, what if I can't continue this poem? What should I do? Won't I be making a fool of myself? She thought about it for a long time, and finally, her eyes lit up. She tore the note and wrote a line on a new one. After Li Yundong received the letter by flying crane, he opened the note and saw a line of affectionate words written on it, if the love between two people lasts for a long time. Logically speaking, there should be another sentence below. Li Yundong knew that this was Qin Guan's famous sentence throughout the ages, but the following sentence was written on the note. Li Yundong understood and smiled. He was about to write, but his heart skipped a beat. He immediately smiled evilly and wrote a line of words. By the time the poor paper crane flew back, it was already dark. As soon as it got into Su Chan's room, it lay on the table and refused to get up again. Su Chan ignored it and rushed to open the note first. As soon as she opened the note and glanced at it, she suddenly burst into laughter. She saw that the note said, if the love between two people lasts for a long time, why would they sleep on the same bed? Su Chan smiled so hard that her eyes narrowed into a line. She whispered, Master, Master, you're still thinking of playing tricks on me from so far away. Looking at the note, the little lass giggled for a moment, and then fell into a daze with a sweet expression on her face. Her soft little heart had long been filled with something called happiness and sweetness. It was as if secretly passing a few notes to the person she loved from thousands of miles away was already the greatest happiness in the world. Chapter 2:16. Go to the internet. The little girl held the note and looked at it again and again. She knew that even Ao Wushuang next door couldn't listen to her giggling. She let out a dry cough, and only then did the little girl wake up. She stole a glance at the next door with a guilty conscience. Seeing that Ao Wushuang was still sitting steadily on the futon, she breathed a sigh of relief. Go to the internet. Please visit this site. Su Chan walked to the table, picked up the pen, and wanted to reply, but saw that the paper crane was lying on the table, motionless. The little girl pushed it with her finger. With a push, the paper crane tilted and fell to the side. It was like a lifeless paper, no longer having the spirituality it had just now. Su Chan was shocked. She fiddled with the paper crane with her finger again, tilting it from one side to the other. She said nervously, Hey, why are you pretending to be dead? But no matter how hard she fiddled with it, the paper crane did not respond at all. Su Chan muttered to herself in disappointment, No way. What's going on? She was full of doubts when Ao Wushuang, who was outside the room, snorted coldly and said, The power of the paper crane is limited. It has no power, idiot. Su Chan was shocked and subconsciously hid the paper crane and the note. But after a while, she realized that her little trick had not been hidden from Ao Wushuang at all. The little girl stuck out her bright red tongue. She gently opened the door, stuck her head out, and said weakly, Master, you know everything? Ao Wushuang didn't even raise her eyelids. She snorted coldly and said, "How can you hide it from me?" Su Chan had been taught a lot by Ao Wushuang, so she was obviously thick-skinned. She giggled shamelessly and said, "Master, why didn't you stop me?" Ao Wushuang snorted and said, "Is it useful? You are in Chao's camp, but your heart is in another's." Su Chan ran out of the room, pulled Ao Wushuang's arm, and said coquettishly, "Master, let me go back." Ao Wushuang opened her eyes and shouted coldly, "No, the heavenly tribulation is coming soon." "Are you going to die?" Su Chan pouted. "When will the heavenly tribulation come? I've been anxiously waiting for you every day." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "Soon, it won't take long. Don't worry." Su Chan rolled her eyes and smiled again. "Master, you will help him, won't you?" Ao Wushuang snorted. Her face was cold and she did not say anything. To watch the net. 7 KOM. Su Chan shook Ao Wushuang's arm with all her might and said in a sweet voice, "Mo's father, Mo's father." At first, Ao Wushuang could still keep a straight face, but after a while, she couldn't help it anymore. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing a smile that was both angry and funny. She pretended to be angry and glared at Su Chan. "It said that girls are extroverted. I think it's not wrong at all. I've raised you for more than 10 years, but I've never seen you treat me like this. You've been out for more than 10 days, and you're already dead set on a man. You're actually thinking about everything for him." Su Chan giggled and said, "Master, do you agree?" Ao Wushuang was both angry and amused at the same time. "Do you know how difficult and dangerous it is to help others cross the heavenly tribulation? You don't want me when you have a man. You are the most heartless person in the world." Su Chan buried her head in Ao Wushuang's arms. She raised her head and said to Ao Wushuang with a smile, "Master, you are the best to me. You won't leave me in the lurch, will you?" Ao Wushuang poked Su Chan's forehead with her finger and said, You're so angry. I really don't know what kind of good fortune he had in his previous life to find such a good Taoist companion like you." Su Chan shook her head and retorted, "No, it's my good fortune from my previous life that I found such a good Taoist companion for me." After that, she jumped out of Ao Wushuang's arms and knelt on the futon. She put her palms together and said with a smile, "Buddha said that if you break a wooden fish in your previous life, you can cultivate a fate in your next life. I think I must have smashed 100 wooden fish before I met a good person like Yundong." Ao Wushuang snorted and said, "You'd better not change your mind. Otherwise, humph." Su Chan jumped up and retorted loudly, "No, Yundong will not change his mind. I believe in him." Ao Wushuang looked at Su Chan lovingly and pitifully. She seemed to have thought of something and sighed slightly. She said in a low voice, "I thought the same way back then. Su Chan, don't follow my old path." Su Chan heard Ao Wushuang whisper something, but she couldn't hear it clearly, so she asked, "Master, what did you just say?" Ao Wushuang sighed and shook her head. "Nothing, I will help him, but wait until the heavenly tribulation is coming." When Su Chan heard this, she jumped up with joy and didn't have time to ask what Ao Wushuang had just said. In her opinion, as long as her master took action, there would be nothing to worry about. At the same time, in the distant Tiannan city, after the paper crane had flown away, Li Yundong had been sitting on the balcony in a daze, waiting for the paper crane to fly back. However, he waited until late at night, but he still didn't see a message from the paper crane. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Li Yundong walked into the house from the balcony in disappointment. He sighed to himself and said with a wry smile, "In this era of computers and the internet, I'm still using the most primitive communication method with this girl. It's really weird. I don't know where Chick is." Li Yundong was in a daze at the door of the balcony for a while. It was not until Ziyuan greeted him that he woke up as if he had just woken up from a dream. "I'm going back," Ziyuan said. Li Yundong responded and opened his mouth. He was about to ask, "Don't you often spend the night here?" But when he was about to say it, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he closed his mouth again. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Ziyuan went out and gently closed the door. After she went out, Li Yundong felt that the room was empty and he was alone. He glanced around and saw that everything in the room had been cleaned up by Ziyuan. The table was covered with a tablecloth, which made it look clean and neat. There was a teacup with warm water on the table, and a note under the teacup. Li Yundong walked over and took a look, only to see that it said, "The heavenly tribulation is coming soon. Don't be distracted." Li Yundong's expression turned cold. He put the note back in its original position, pressed it with a bowl, and drank a mouthful of water. As soon as the water entered his stomach, Li Yundong felt a warm feeling flowing in his blood. The top of his head seemed to be a little transparent, and the nidin in his lower abdomen was vaguely much stronger. No way, drinking a cup of water can strengthen the shintong? Li Yundong suddenly felt a little strange, but he didn't know what the reason was for a while. Li Yundong thought for a while, but couldn't come up with an answer. So he sat down cross-legged in the living room alone. He practiced qi until dawn. Then, carrying the fan of the 7 treasures on his back, he walked toward the school. His legs were as fast as the wind, and he didn't care about the sidelong glances of the passers-by. His speed was not much slower than the speed of a bus, and it only took him half an hour to reach the school. As soon as he entered the school gate, he found that all eyes were on him. In the past, 7 or 8 out of 10 people in this school recognized Li Yundong, but there were always 2 or 3 who didn't care about the world. Especially after the freshmen entered the school, only 5 or 6 out of 10 people would recognize Li Yundong. But now, 9 out of 10 people knew Li Yundong. As soon as Li Yundong entered the school gate, his iconic black cloth wrapped around the fan of the 7 treasures attracted everyone's attention. The students whispered to each other. Li Yundong was a little scared by their stares. Just as he was about to walk into the teaching building, he heard a voice laughing next to him. "You don't know who you are, Li Yundong." Then another voice laughed and said, "What's the point of mingling around the school?" Li Yundong didn't need to look back to know that it was Feng Na and Ching Ching. He turned around with a smile. Sure enough, it was Feng Na and Ching Ching. They were standing side by side, looking at him with smiles on their faces. Ching Ching was indeed someone who had begun to integrate with society. She wore a white long-sleeved shirt. The buttons on the front of the shirt were so full that they looked like they were going to burst. She wore a pair of black Western-style trousers, which outlined her slender figure. She was dressed like an office lady, which made her look very feminine and very professional. Li Yundong looked her up and down and smiled. "Not bad. TSK. You look like an office lady now." Ching Ching slapped Li Yundong on the shoulder and said, "Oh, come on. How can someone like me catch your eye?" There was a saying among martial artists, "Strangers should not get close to you." In other words, acquaintances and strangers should not get close to you, let alone reach out and pat you on any part of your body. They were afraid that you would suddenly attack them. When 2 people's kung fu skills were very similar, this kind of sneak attack was absolutely impossible to guard against. It was the same for cultivators. When Li Yundong saw Ching Cheng's hand coming at him, he instinctively dodged. Ching Cheng was stunned when she hit nothing. Only then did Li Yundong react. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "Sorry, it was a conditioned reflex." Ching Cheng came back to her senses and waved her hand. "It's okay. You're a martial artist. I understand." After that, she seemed to remember something and said angrily and hurriedly, "By the way, I heard Nana say that you showed off your power in the cafeteria last time?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly. "What do you mean by showing off my power?" Then he turned to Feng Na and said, "Feng Na, don't make a big deal out of this." Feng Na covered her mouth and laughed. "I'm just telling the truth." Ching Cheng's heart was filled with indignation. "I didn't see it last time. I lost big time. No, you have to compensate me. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How do I compensate you? Feng Na and Qing Qing looked at each other, and there was a hint of success in their eyes. Feng Na smiled and said, I'll ask you to move the table. After all, you're so strong. Li Yundong laughed. Hey, you're just looking for a strong man, you know? Dangua doesn't do that anymore. Qing Qing laughed. Dangua doesn't do that anymore, but we in the Celestial Empire do. Cut the crap and come with us at noon. Li Yundong shook his head and nodded helplessly at Qing Qing and Feng Na. I really don't know what to do with you two. Well, we'll talk about it at noon. I have classes in the morning. After saying that, he walked into the school building. After a few steps, he found Feng Na and Qing Qing following behind him. Why are you following me? He asked curiously. Are you afraid that I'll run away? Feng Na smiled and said, There's no class today, so the two of us will compromise and be your bodyguards today. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who's protecting who? He shook his head and walked toward the classroom. As soon as he entered, he saw Ding Nan walking toward him. Do you want to know where Zhou Qin is? She asked coldly. Chapter 217. Go to see Net. In Li Yundong's opinion, Ding Nan was a very complicated girl. She was very smart, knew what she wanted, and knew how to get it. She was good at expressing her emotions and showing the most beautiful parts of her body. Go to see Net. Please use visit home station. She had the vanity of a woman's natural yearning to worship money and power, but in her heart, she still retained a little bit of innocence that a 20-year-old girl should have. She was like a person at a crossroads. If she went a little to the left, she would be an innocent little girl, but if she went a little to the right, she would be a hypocritical and vain woman. Li Yundong was stunned by Ding Nan's words. He subconsciously asked, Do you know where Zhou Qin is? Ding Nan looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. Her expression was cold, as if she still couldn't forget the unintentional hurt that Li Yundong had caused her last time. Of course I do. Li Yundong asked, Where is she? Why doesn't she come to school? Ding Nan sneered. I'm afraid that she won't be able to come to school ever again. Li Yundong was shocked. His heart skipped a beat. She won't be involved in my affairs, will she? Seeing Li Yundong's nervous expression, Ding Nan felt even more uncomfortable. She sneered and said, What's wrong? Are you worried? Are you worried? She is my friend, Li Yundong said seriously. Isn't it natural for me to care about her? Ding Nan's heart was filled with jealousy. Yes, she is your friend, she said coldly. That's because she used to be rich and powerful. I'd like to know how you'll treat her if she suddenly has no money or power. Li Yundong, never look at how much money a person has in their wallet, Li Yundong said in a low voice. You have a powerful family background. Qing Qing couldn't help but chime in, that's right. Li Yundong is not a snob. Feng Na nodded vigorously as well. Ding Nan couldn't help but feel angry. Well, so I'm a snob? She glared at Qing Qing and Feng Na and said coldly, Hypocrite. Qing Qing was furious. Just as she was about to let loose a torrent of abuse, Feng Na pulled her back and shook her head. Ding Nan, I don't care what the people around me think of me, but Zhou Qin is my friend. She was my friend when she was rich and powerful. Now that she's out of money and power, she's even more of a friend. If you know her whereabouts, please tell me. I will be very grateful. Ding Nan couldn't help but look Li Yundong's face up and down, as if she was observing the real world in his heart when he said those words. Ding Nan had been scheming against others all day long. She did not believe that there was anyone in the world who was not greedy for power. Watch Net. Therefore, in her opinion, what Li Yundong had said must have been hypocritical and polite words. Although Ding Nan was good at observing people's expressions, she couldn't see the slightest bit of hypocrisy in his eyes and face. She couldn't help but feel a little shaken. Could it be that he really doesn't care about these things? How could this be? How could there be such a person in this world? Ding Nan sneered. I'll give you 1 day. Think about it carefully. I'll tell you where she is in a day. Then, she turned around and walked to the back of her seat. She sat down and looked at Li Yundong coldly. She sneered in her heart. I want to see what kind of expression and reaction you'll have when you see her. When she was in power, everyone was trying to get close to her. Now that she's out of power, everyone is avoiding her. I want to see what kind of choice you'll make in a day. Hey, what's wrong with her? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to chase after Ding Nan and ask her about it, but Ding Nan ignored him and sat back in her seat. Li Yundong had no choice but to walk to the back of the classroom and sit down. Feng Na and Ching Ching looked at each other and sat down as well. Li Yundong thought for a while in the back of the classroom and said, No, I have to ask her. Li Yundong, it's not like you haven't dealt with Ding Nan before, Feng Na said. She won't let go once she's set on something. You won't be able to ask her. She'll tell you in 2 days. Don't worry. Ching Ching was stunned by Ding Nan's words before. She sneered and said, Who knows if she's bluffing and deliberately stirring up trouble to attract your attention. She's been at odds with Zhou Qin for a long time. How could she possibly know where Zhou Qin is? Li Yundong shook his head. No. Ding Nan has been with Zhou Qin for a long time. She has accumulated a lot of connections and resources. She must have her own information sources and channels. If Zhou Qin is not around, she is the most well-informed person in this school. Even so, there's no need to be anxious. The more anxious you are, the happier she will be and the less she'll tell you. Feng Na said. Ching Ching quickly fanned the flames and said, That's right, that's right. Li Yundong thought for a moment and let out a long sigh. That's all we can do. I hope Zhou Qin is fine. Although he said so, his brows were tightly furrowed. He felt as if there was a stone wall in his chest, which made him very uncomfortable. Feng Na saw the worry on his face, so she smiled and changed the topic. By the way, Ching Ching, how's your work going? She said, winking at her. Ching Ching was a little confused at first. Didn't I tell you about work a long time ago? Why are you asking again? She thought. But when she saw Feng Na winking at her, she immediately understood. She pretended to be indignant and said, Don't mention it. I'm so angry. Li Yundong's attention was indeed attracted. He asked in confusion, What's wrong? Ching Ching said angrily, That perverted father of mine only knows how to stare at my chest all day long. Yesterday, he touched my leg and said that he wanted to talk to me about work tonight. Go to Kanban. / what work do I have to talk to him about? He's just trying to take advantage of me, isn't he? Li Yundong was angry when he heard this. He frowned and said, You didn't beat him up. Ching Ching covered her mouth and laughed. Do you think I'm as good as you? If I had even 10% of your skills, he wouldn't be a man for the rest of his life. Besides, what could I do to him? He's the boss, so I couldn't sue him. I could only resign and say goodbye to him. Li Yundong sighed. It's so hard to find a good job these days. Ching Ching laughed. Li Yundong, you can open your own company in the future. We'll follow you. As she said this, Feng Na nodded like a chick pecking at rice. That's right. You don't have the heart to let those perverted bosses bully us, do you? Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. I don't even have a job. Besides, aren't you afraid of being exploited by me? Ching Ching giggled. Someone here wants to be stripped by you. Feng Na's face turned red. She pounced on Ching Ching and pinched her hard. What nonsense are you talking about? Li Yundong watched the two girls fight. The weather was still very hot at this time, and the two girls were not wearing much. This fight really made their bodies fly together, and their waists and breasts were the same color. Li Yundong felt a little embarrassed. He looked straight ahead and coughed dryly. "Hey, the teacher is here." Only then did Feng Na and Qing Qing sit up straight, their faces flushed red. Li Yundong saw that the two girls were silent, and the atmosphere was very awkward. He said in a low voice, "How about I go to Chao Kefi or Yi Mengfan and see if there are any jobs that are suitable for you?" Qing Qing was overjoyed. She was about to say something, but Feng Na said, "No, we don't know them well." Qing Qing and Feng Na were close friends. As soon as Feng Na finished speaking, Qing Qing knew what she was thinking. She looked at Feng Na and couldn't help but sigh in her heart. "Nana, in the end, you still don't want to give up this competition." Li Yundong didn't know what the girl was thinking. Seeing that Feng Na had refused, he didn't force her. He just smiled and said, "Forget it. But I do have plans to start a small business in the future. If I need help, I'll come to you." Feng Na and Qing Qing were overjoyed. "Really?" they asked in unison. Li Yundong wanted to tease them. "No," he said with a straight face. Feng Na and Qing Qing's faces immediately fell. "Pfft," they said in unison. When the class was over and they finished eating, Li Yundong was dragged by Feng Na and Qing Qing to move the tables. When he arrived at the small auditorium, Li Yundong found that there were already a lot of people sitting inside. He asked curiously, "Why are there so many people at this hour?" He glanced around and saw that the podium and tables were already in place. There was no need for him to move them. Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Didn't you say that you wanted me to move the tables? Where can I move the tables?" Feng Na laughed and said, "I was just teasing you. How could I let a famous person like you move the tables? I was afraid that you wouldn't come to my campaign speech, so I made an extra move to get you here." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I said that I would come, so I will." Feng Na made a face at him and said, "That's not necessarily true. You are a famous person now. You are too busy to show your face." As she spoke, the students around them looked at Li Yundong with eager eyes, as if to prove that she was right. Some of the students couldn't help but whisper to each other as they looked at Li Yundong. After a while, one of the students shouted, "Boss, we want to watch Living with a Stewardess." As soon as the words left his mouth, another voice shouted, "I want it uncensored." Then, a third voice said, "Boss, you didn't finish it last time. Let's finish it this time." Li Yundong was dumbfounded and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then, he saw the boys among the crowd shouting, "We want to see the stewardess, we want to see the stewardess." Li Yundong saw that their voices were in sync, like a chorus, and it was very F***king rhythmic. Some of them were even clapping and stamping their feet. "Damn, do you think there's a concert here?" Li Yundong was about to speak when he suddenly heard a voice in the crowd shouting, "Stewardess, stewardess, stewardess." Then, almost everyone in the small auditorium, regardless of gender, followed suit and shouted in unison, "Stewardess! Stewardess! Stewardess!" Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed out loud. "Empty my ass." He was a cultivator with a strong aura. Although he didn't speak loudly, his voice was still clearly heard by everyone. Suddenly, the small auditorium fell silent. The silence only lasted for a while before another voice shouted, "No hair, no horse. No hair, no censored." Then, the crowd shouted in unison, "No hair, no horse. No hair, no horse." Feng Na and Qing Qing were amused by the scene in front of them and laughed wildly, rolling on the ground with their hands covering their stomachs. Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh as well. After laughing for a while, he suddenly forced himself to stop laughing and deliberately put on a righteous face. He put his palms together and said, "Amitabha, this poor monk has stopped watching porn for many years. Benefactors, you can stop now." Li Yundong's Buddhist chant was clear and loud, and his powerful and magnetic voice echoed in the small auditorium. For a moment, the voices of the crowd were suppressed, and the small auditorium became quiet again. Seeing that the crowd had finally quieted down, Li Yundong also breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to find a place to sit down, he suddenly heard someone in the crowd say, "Good, good." It turns out that the master has cultivated to the point where he has seen all the porn in the world and has no horse in his heart. Amitabha, sex is emptiness, and emptiness is sex. Good, good, good. As soon as the voice finished speaking, a burst of crazy laughter suddenly broke out in the small auditorium. The sound almost lifted the roof. Li Yundong couldn't help but curse in his heart, F***ck, what kind of a group of stupid people are they? Chapter 218. Go to the internet. // Li Yundong hadn't expected that the people in the auditorium would still remember the flight attendant incident so vividly. It had been more than 2 months, but they could still make such a big fuss about it. This bunch of idiots. They really don't want to cause a scene. Li Yundong rolled his eyes at everyone in the room, especially at Feng Na and Ching Cheng, who were laughing so hard that they almost passed away. He threw a pair of huge health balls at them. Go to the internet. Go to the internet. Go to the internet. Normally, when these students saw Li Yundong, none of them dared to come up to him and flirt with him like this. This was because Li Yundong's aura was too strong, and his legendary deeds were too powerful. It made him look like a god that no one dared to approach. But at this time, the students all realized that there was no doubt that this guy was a mortal like them. Li Yundong was made fun of for a while. When he saw Feng Na and Ching Cheng laughing so hard that they were about to pass out, he couldn't help but say, "Hey, if you guys keep laughing, I'm leaving." Feng Na rubbed her stomach and waved her hands in pain. "My stomach hurts. I'm laughing so hard. I can't breathe," she moaned. Ching Cheng was also laughing so hard that she couldn't breathe. Her stomach hurt so much that she could only gasp and grimace. Li Yundong shook his head and reached out to stroke Feng Na's back. Feng Na suddenly felt warm all over, as if a warm current was flowing into her back, smoothing out her breathing and stopping her laughter. Ching Cheng saw that Feng Na was obviously getting better. She grabbed Li Yundong's arm and pointed at herself. Although she was smiling, there was pain in her eyes, and she couldn't say anything. Li Yundong followed her example and stroked her back. Immediately, she felt her breath come back to her body. Feng Na and Ching Cheng finally caught their breath. They touched their chests in shock and looked at each other. Suddenly, they felt like laughing again. Li Yundong quickly threatened, "Hey, if you guys keep laughing, I'm really leaving. I don't care if you guys die of laughter." Feng Na held back her laughter and said, "Look at how high your social prestige is. It's a good thing you're not running for president of the student council. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any hope." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said, "I think it will be a little difficult for you to be elected as the president of the student union." Feng Na smiled and said, "No, what happened just now made me feel that I will definitely be elected as the student council president." Li Yundong laughed and said, "If you can become the president of the student union, I will definitely help you perform well in your show." Feng Na couldn't help but say, "Wow, so you're planning on not putting in any effort?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Wrong, I was going to stand you up." Feng Na laughed and scolded, "Li Yundong, you're such a sly old fox. Fortunately, this old man is wise and powerful. Otherwise, wouldn't I cry myself to death?" Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly saw 2 familiar figures enter the auditorium from the corner of his eye. Li Yundong turned his head and saw Ruan Hongling walking into the small auditorium, followed by Yan Hua, who was smiling all the way. To watch the net. Ruan Hongling entered the small auditorium and glanced around. When her eyes fell on Li Yundong, she was stunned and quickly walked over. Ruan Hongling glanced at Feng Na and Qing Qing, who were beside Li Yundong, with a trace of hostility in her eyes. She lowered her voice and said, "What are you doing here?" Although Li Yundong had a lot of conflicts with this girl, it was not good to fall out with her here. He asked back, "What are you doing here again?" Ruan Hongling was slightly angry and said, "The heavenly tribulation is coming. Why aren't you concentrating on cultivation? What are you doing here? Don't you know how much Sister Ziyuan has done for you?" Li Yundong didn't like others to meddle in his personal affairs. He was secretly unhappy and said, "Haven't you heard of the way of civil and martial arts?" Ruan Hongling said angrily, "You." When Yan Hua saw Ruan Hongling and Li Yundong arguing, his heart skipped a beat. He felt that the opportunity to flatter had come, so he immediately leaned over and said to Li Yundong with a cold snort, "Are you also here to run for the president of the student union?" Li Yundong glanced at Yan Hua and didn't answer him. Instead, he turned to Feng Na and said with a smile, "You have a competitor." Feng Na was still very ladylike in front of outsiders. She smiled and said politely to Yan Hua, "Are you also participating in the election for the president of the student union?" Seeing that Feng Na was speaking to him politely, Yan Hua also turned around politely and said, "Yes, you are senior sister Feng Na, right? Please give me some advice when the time comes." Feng Na saw that although he was polite, there was still a sense of superiority in his bones. She felt a little uncomfortable in her heart, but still smiled and said, "You're flattering me. The back of the Yangtze River pushes on the front, and the front dies on the beach. Junior brother, just don't make me die too ugly later." Yan Hua chuckled. Although his smile was reserved, he couldn't hide his self-admiration. He glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help but say sarcastically, "It seems that some people still have self-awareness and didn't participate in the election for the president of the student union. Otherwise, would have let him know what it means to be the president of the student union." Before Li Yundong had time to get angry, Ruan Hongling, who was beside him, laughed out loud. Ruan Hongling thought to herself, "You are the one who really doesn't know the difference between heaven and earth." Although Li Yundong is annoying, he is now a rising star of cultivation with small Shentong. "Who do you think you are, barking here all day long?" However, she couldn't say these words out loud, so she could only sneer. Seeing her sneer, Yan Hua thought that Ruan Hongling agreed with his words, so he became more and more proud. He said to Feng Na arrogantly, "Senior sister, how is your preparation for the election speech?" Feng Na smiled and said, "I didn't prepare much." "I guess you are well prepared?" Yan Hua pretended to be modest and said, "It's just so." As he spoke, he looked around and couldn't wait to jump on the stage immediately and show off his skills. After a while, the small auditorium became more and more crowded. Gradually, it was overcrowded. In the end, the teachers and school leaders entered and sat in the front row. Although this kind of student union election was voted on by the students, the final school committee had a veto vote, although the school committee almost never used this veto vote in order to respect the rights of the students. Go to the internet. Yan Hua, Feng Na, and the others who were going to participate in the election for the position of president of the student union sat in the front, while Li Yundong, Ruan Hongling, and Qing Qing sat in the back. After a while, after the teacher's opening remarks, the first student came on the stage and began to speak. Li Yundong looked at the field and said to Ruan Hongling in a low voice, "Why are you here? Don't tell me you're here to supervise my cultivation." Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "Don't flatter yourself. I'm here to experience more of the world. If the cultivators of the Linggong sect can't understand the world, their cultivation skills will be greatly reduced." Li Yundong was a little stunned. "Oh, I see." After a while, the student who was speaking on the stage walked down. The students under the stage whispered to each other and commented on the candidate just now. The second contestant was a short and stout boy. After he got on the stage, he began his speech. His saliva flew everywhere, and almost all the teachers in the first row below the stage had their faces covered. The teachers had no choice but to put up the books in front of them to block the wind and rain. Yan Hua, who was under the stage, sneered secretly. Humph, a third-rate university is a third-rate university. What kind of talent can there be? How can such a person participate in the election for the president of the student union? What a joke. This year, there were not many students who participated in the election for the president of the student union. There were only 8 people in total. Among them, the first few seemed to be of uneven quality. Many students under the stage booed. When Yan Hua came on the stage, the students were stunned and stopped booing. Yan Hua came from an excellent family. His parents were high-level intellectuals. It could be said that he came from a scholarly family. He had read all kinds of books since he was a child. Although he was not a scholar, he could be considered a rare scholar among his peers. As soon as Yan Hua came on the stage, the pride and confidence that came from his bones stunned the students under the stage. He looked around the stage, and wherever he looked, the whispers stopped. The students were shocked by his momentum and stared at him intently. They wanted to see what kind of election speech this imposing boy would give later. Even the teacher under the stage nodded secretly. Finally, there's a decent candidate. After Yan Hua calmed the crowd, he began his speech. Li Yundong listened carefully under the stage. Although he didn't like this boy very much, to be fair, Yan Hua was indeed eloquent. His speech was confident and full of passion, very much like the style of a Western speaker. It was a completely unscripted speech, but there was no pause between the words. Moreover, it was orderly and reasonable. There were also some profound special nouns and English in the middle, which greatly shocked the students under the stage. After Yan Hua finished his 10-minute speech, the audience was silent. Almost all the students were looking at Yan Hua, and in their minds, they were secretly shocked. Although this person looks cocky, he does have some ability. The top scorer is really not for show. Clap, clap, clap. A teacher took the lead and began to clap, followed by a second and a third person. Even Li Yundong couldn't help but clap and nod secretly. Ching Ching couldn't help but say angrily, "No way, you actually defected to the enemy? Have you forgotten how this guy mocked you?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I don't know what kind of person he is, but his speech was really good. He deserves my applause." Ching Cheng was angry with Li Yundong. She rolled her eyes and said, "Okay, you're a big man. I think Nana's election will be difficult later. Damn it, I feel uncomfortable when I think about this guy being the president of the student union. Hey, can you stand him being the president of the student union? You're so cocky now. Won't you be cocky when the time comes?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "What does it have to do with me who is the president of the student union? Of course, I personally support Feng Na being the president." Ching Ching said angrily, "Are you an idiot? If you let him be the president of the student union, will you still have a good life? Won't he make things difficult for you all day long?" Li Yundong smiled noncommittally, but in his heart, he was very disapproving. "Are you kidding me? I'm a cultivator. Why would I be afraid of a president of the student union? Isn't this just a joke?" Just as he was secretly snorting, Feng Na had already walked onto the stage. She was wearing a light yellow dress with a light blue belt around her waist. Her long hair was draped over her shoulders. She looked simple and elegant. After Feng Na went on stage, her beautiful eyes sparkled. She glanced around the field with a charming smile, and the whispers under the stage slowly faded away. Yan Hua looked at Feng Na with his arms crossed in front of his chest. In his heart, he was proud of a winner. He didn't think that the other party could surpass him. At the same time, he was a little curious. I wonder what kind of election speech this senior sister will give. Chapter 219. Go to watch net. Feng Na adjusted the position of the microphone and said with a smile, "When I was chatting with Junior Yan Hua in the audience just now, I said that the new waves of the Yangtze River drive the old waves, and the old waves die on the beach. I hope he won't let me die too ugly. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Now, he really didn't show any mercy and let me die an ugly death. Before she could finish her words, a burst of good-natured laughter came from the audience. Fong Na smiled and said, since there is a beautiful jade in front of me, I think I don't need to take out the bricks I prepared. My campaign speech is very simple, just a few words. After she finished speaking, the students in the audience became curious. Fong Na's unconventional way of doing things made Yan Hua curious and vigilant. He muttered, what tricks is she going to play? Fong Na stretched out her hand and pointed at Li Yundong, who was sitting at the back. Everyone knows him, right? Everyone's eyes suddenly turned to Li Yundong, which caught him off guard. He was stunned. Holy sh*t, why did this girl mention me? Some nosy students in the small auditorium shouted, of course I know him. Some of the teachers in the audience couldn't help frowning when they saw Li Yundong. Yan Hua was even more confused. He had no idea what Fong Na's move, which was like a flying immortal from outer space, meant. Fong Na pursed her lips and smiled. Does everyone remember Li Yundong's wonderful performance at the exchange party last semester? Many students in the audience suddenly became excited. Yes, of course. Some freshmen who hadn't seen Li Yundong's performance also asked the people around them curiously. Fong Na smiled and said, at that time, I begged Li Yundong for a long time before he reluctantly agreed to participate in the performance. I invited him to participate in a very good program at this year's welcome party, but he said that he would only participate in the performance if I won the position of the president of the student union. When Fong Na said this, both the teachers and the students in the small auditorium were shocked. They had never seen such a campaign speech before. Li Yundong was even more shocked. Holy sh*t, that's too shameless. She actually used me as a shield. The teachers were also stunned. It can't be. Are the students nowadays so utilitarian? Yan Hua protested angrily, what kind of speech is this? It's too shameless. She took a deep breath and said, I'm in my 4th year at Tiannan University. So, if you want to see Li Yundong's wonderful performance, please vote for me to be the president of the student council. Please. With that, she bent down, bowed, and left the stage. The audience was in an uproar. The students burst out laughing. They admired Fong Na's earth-shattering approach, but what shocked them the most was that Fong Na had actually put the agreement between her and Li Yundong on the table, and then seduced the students into making their own choices. This was simply too shameless. But I like it. The students laughed heartily. Some of them even waved their arms and shouted, Boss, we support you. You have to perform well at the party. Some of the students who were eager to see the world in chaos started chanting Li Yundong's name rhythmically. Li Yundong, act. Li Yundong, act. As Fong Na walked down the stage, some students chased after her curiously and asked, Hey, senior sister, what will Li Yundong be doing? Tell me. Fong Na pursed her lips into a smile and said deliberately, You want to know? Vote for me. The surrounding students laughed and scolded, That's too shameless. The teachers looked at Fong Na dumbfoundedly and shook their heads. Yan Hua even stomped his feet and scolded, This is cheating. This is bribery. She must be disqualified. But as soon as his voice came out, it was drowned out by the noise of the small auditorium. No one could hear what he was saying. When Fong Na returned to Li Yundong and Ching Cheng was already laughing so hard that she couldn't stand up straight. She laughed and said, Nana, you are too strong and shameless. I admire you so much. You actually thought of such a powerful move. I worship you. After saying that, Ching Cheng made a gesture of prostrating herself on the ground. Go to see net. Chanjom Fong Na proudly made a victory sign with her hand and said, If I go into action, I can do it alone. Li Yundong looked at Fong Na with a straight face and said very solemnly, Feng Na, I swear to God that you are absolutely the most shameless person in the world, the most shocking and the most shameless person in all of history. Feng Na's face darkened. Feng Na laughed with her hands on her hips and said proudly, "Thank you for the compliment." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said, "Compliment my ass. Your trick won't succeed. See how I'll make your plot fail." With that, he turned around and said loudly, "Students, quiet down." As soon as Li Yundong spoke, the students in the small auditorium quieted down and looked at him in unison, wanting to hear what he had to say. Li Yundong coughed and said, "Senior sister Feng Na was just joking with you. Don't take it seriously." After he said that, the small auditorium fell silent for a moment, but soon a student shook his arm and shouted, "Boss, we will support you." Then, the students in the small auditorium raised their arms one after another and shouted, "We will support you." Li Yundong laughed and said to Feng Na proudly, "You see, the eyes of the masses are as clear as snow." Feng Na smiled and didn't say anything. After a while, the students began to vote actively. Some of them whispered to each other and looked at Li Yundong one after another. "Go to see." About 10 minutes later, the students finished voting. A teacher and several students from the student union went on the stage and began to announce the votes. The first vote was for Yan Hua. Yan Hua's face suddenly lit up. He turned his face and looked at Feng Na provocatively, then at Li Yundong with hatred. But then, the second vote was for Feng Na. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and scolding, "Damn, there's really someone who would choose you like this?" Feng Na was still smiling and didn't say anything. Not long after, the third, fourth, fifth, and finally, they all voted for Feng Na. Li Yundong was stunned. After the voting was over, he saw 2 rows of shocking words written on the blackboard hanging on the stage of the small auditorium. Yan Hua, 1 vote. Feng Na, 499 votes. The others didn't get a single vote, not even their names. Damn it. Li Yundong couldn't help standing up and widening his eyes. What's going on? The students in the small auditorium looked at him in unison and shouted in unison, "Li Yundong, we support you. We support you." Li Yundong was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. F***ck, you call this supporting me? You guys are obviously trying to make a scene, okay? Ching Cheng and Feng Na laughed. Ching Cheng smiled at Feng Na and said, "Nana, you did it. You also promoted your new program at the party and locked in Li Yundong, the best foreign aide. You killed 3 birds with 1 stone. It's amazing. I admire you so much. You are a genius." Feng Na proudly raised a victory sign and said, "Of course." Yan Hua, who was at the front, rushed to the teacher angrily, waved his arms and shouted, "This election is unfair. It can't be counted. I protest, I protest." Seeing that Yan Hua was so emotional, the leading teacher comforted him, "Yan Hua, pay attention to your emotions. Don't get agitated. The school committee will discuss this matter." Yan Hua glared at Feng Na angrily. In his heart, he really despised Feng Na's methods. Li Yundong, who was in the middle of his flirtation, saw the teachers of the school committee huddled together and whispered to each other. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "By the way, the school committee has a veto vote. Feng Na, I'm afraid your wishful thinking is not going to work." Feng Na smiled and said, "Really? Do you want to make another bet?" Li Yundong saw that she was full of confidence and couldn't help but wonder, will the school committee really agree? Isn't this ridiculous? This will probably be the most ridiculous election in the history of Tiannan University's student union. If word gets out, it will become a joke. While he was thinking, he suddenly saw Yan Hua walk over and say to Feng Na in a stern voice, "You won't succeed with this kind of dirty trick." Before Feng Na could say anything, Ching Ching yelled, "Black cat, white cat, good cat if it can catch mice." Feng Na smiled and said to Yan Hua, the teachers of the school committee will decide the result of this election. Yan Hua sneered. Of course. I don't believe that the teachers will be as crazy as the students. As soon as his voice fell, Vice President Feng walked up to the stage, picked up the microphone, and said, "Dear students, after a discussion by the school committee, in order to show respect for the students' right to vote, the school committee has decided to approve Feng Na as the president of the student union. The result of the election will take effect immediately." As soon as he finished speaking, the students below the stage burst into laughter and cheered for him. Vice Principal Feng coughed dryly and said, "However, due to the uniqueness of Feng Na's election method, the school committee believes that this method can only be used once. Otherwise, it will be considered as cheating and will be disqualified from the election." The students didn't care about what he said. They only cared about the fact that this time, Feng Na had been elected president of the student union in a very shameless way, and that Li Yundong had promised to attend the party. At that time, there would be a good show. Some students shouted loudly, "Long live the teachers." It made the teachers feel very emotional that a student who had been against the teachers all day could shout such a thing. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said to Feng Na, "You're so lucky. How could you pass like this? Isn't this a little too outrageous? What are the teachers thinking about?" As soon as his voice fell, he saw the students in the auditorium rushing toward him. These students had obviously lost control of their emotions. They shouted, "Li Yundong, what are you going to perform this time? Boss, give me an autograph. Li Yundong, I love you. Let me be your girlfriend." Li Yundong was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He didn't even have time to say goodbye to Feng Na before he ran out of the auditorium like a wolf and a mouse. Yan Hua, who had been standing there in a daze, was shocked and angry. He rushed up to the teachers and shouted angrily, "Are you crazy? How could the dignified school board make such a ridiculous decision?" Vice Principal Feng was also a little angry when he saw Yan Hua's impolite words. He said coldly, "Yan Hua, you have no right to judge the decision made by the school board. Also, I suggest that if you want to run for the position of student union president, you should learn the etiquette of respecting your teachers." With that, he and the other teachers filed out of the small auditorium. The students in the auditorium who had been blocking their way inside the auditorium made way for them and applauded. While applauding the teachers, Ching Ching whispered to Feng Na, "Nana, you didn't really have a card up your sleeve, did you?" Feng Na smiled proudly. "What do you think?" Ching Ching said thoughtfully, "Li Yundong's popularity at Tiannan University has reached an incredible level. If you use his popularity to your advantage, you might be able to achieve this result. But aren't you afraid of the school board's veto?" Feng Na blinked at Ching Ching. "Have you forgotten what we saw at the school board last time?" "Ah, you mean." Ching Ching suddenly remembered that the last time she and Feng Na stood in front of the school board's office and saw an official walk out of it, all the heads of the school had behaved respectfully toward him. Since then, not a single teacher in the school had dared to point fingers at Li Yundong. Ching Cheng's eyes widened. Ching Ching pointed at Feng Na and said with a smile, "You sly guy. So you knew that the school leaders didn't dare to offend Li Yundong's background?" The two girls whispered to each other and laughed secretly. Yan Hua was so angry that he almost went crazy. He rushed up to Feng Na again and shouted angrily, "I don't accept this. If you have the ability, then come and compete with me for the election. I won't lose to you." Feng Na looked at him sympathetically and sighed. She said, "You didn't lose to me, you lost to Li Yundong." Yan Hua couldn't swallow his anger. He choked and said, "I lost to him? He didn't participate in the speech?" Feng Na smiled and said, "How could I have defeated you without him? I'm just borrowing his power. If he runs for the president of the student union himself, both you and I will have to stand aside. Do you understand? Yan Hua, you have to remember, as long as you are at Tiannan University, don't even think about competing with this boy, because the height he has reached is beyond your reach, /om/." Chapter 220. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong rushed out of the small auditorium, he ran dozens of meters away before he stopped in shock. He put his hands on his hips, shook his head, and sighed to himself, Li Yundong, you are a cultivator, but you were so scared that you peed your pants. You are really useless. Li Yundong looked back at the small auditorium and said with a wry smile, this place is definitely my bad luck. It was like this last time, and it will be the same this time. Li Yundong shook his head and laughed for a while, then walked to the school library, ready to return the books and borrow some new ones. Go to watch net. When he arrived at the library, the old man in charge of the library saw Li Yundong and immediately smiled. Have you finished reading the books you borrowed yesterday? Li Yundong smiled, took out 2 books, and handed them over. Then, he chose 2 more books and said with a smile, yes, sorry to trouble you again. The old man smiled and said, don't mention it. This is our job. As he spoke, he walked to the library area and helped Li Yundong choose the 2 books he wanted. He handed them over with a smile, but his eyes fell on the fan of 7 treasures tightly wrapped in cloth behind Li Yundong. He suddenly asked, is it convenient for you to carry such a big thing on your back? Li Yundong took the book and said casually with a smile, at first, it was very inconvenient, but now I'm a little used to it. The old man nodded slowly and asked tentatively, if I ask you what's inside, you probably won't tell me either. Li Yundong chuckled and didn't answer. He just waved his hand politely to the old man and said, goodbye, teacher. I'll come back next time. The old man also smiled and didn't say anything more. Li Yundong walked slowly home. When he got home, it was already past 5 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as he opened the door, he saw that the cooked food was already on the table. It was steaming and fragrant. Li Yundong knew that it must have been Ziyuan's cooking. He smiled and shouted, Ziyuan? Did you cook it? He shouted and walked to the kitchen, but he didn't see Ziyuan. Although the kitchen had been cooked, it was neatly cleaned and shiny. Li Yundong sat at the table and ate his dinner slowly. After cleaning the dishes and chopsticks in the kitchen, he returned to the living room and found that Ziyuan was still making a cup of water on the coffee table in the living room. He tested the temperature. Although it had been a while, the water was still warm. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart, except for her cold temperament and being a little too otherworldly. She is simply the most perfect woman in the world in other aspects. She is so beautiful, does housework so well, and is so meticulous. Whoever marries her is really blessed by several lifetimes. Li Yundong wasn't thirsty at first, but when he saw the transparent color of the glass of water with a faint green color, he couldn't help but taste it curiously. After tasting it, he immediately found that the water was the same as the one he had drunk last time. It had a clear and bright feeling, as if the qi and blood in his body would be much more smooth and vigorous as soon as he touched it. Watch net. Color ** literature _learning % super #speed. Update. There's a mystery. Li Yundong looked at the glass of water curiously. The last time he had eaten the ginseng fruit, he hadn't tasted it carefully. This time, he took a sip and tasted it carefully. As soon as he tasted it, he suddenly felt a fragrance lingering in his mouth. The lingering fragrance filled his mouth, and even his teeth had a refreshing feeling. Li Yundong became more and more curious. He couldn't help but drink up the glass of water, then sat cross-legged in the living room and began to meditate and practice qi. Li Yundong found that after drinking this glass of water, his meditation and qi cultivation were twice the result with half the effort, and the speed at which the Niden was growing had even doubled. In the past, it was only half the size of a pinky, but now it was the size of a pinky. Through introspection, Li Yundong could clearly feel that this Niden was constantly growing at an astonishing speed. By the time Li Yundong woke up from his meditation, it was already around 12 o'clock in the middle of the night. It was dark all around. Except for the door, all the windows and doors were open, and the sound of the wind echoed in the room. A slim figure stood quietly on the balcony, like a fairy who had descended from heaven. Her figure was ethereal, and her long sleeves were fluttering. It was Zi Yuan. Li Yundong found Zi Yuan standing silently on the balcony. He said in surprise, "You're here? What's the matter?" While Li Yundong was cultivating, Zi Yuan had been staring at him, as if she was guarding him or observing his progress. When she saw that Li Yundong had woken up, she moved her eyes away and looked at the empty cup on the tea table beside her. She nodded secretly and asked, "How do you feel about the Shintong cultivation?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Not bad. I feel that my Naiden is twice as strong as before. I don't know if the progress is fast." "Is it fast?" A clear voice sounded from the side. Ruan Hongling's figure flashed and appeared next to Zi Yuan in the blink of an eye. She put her hands on her hips and said, "Do you know that ordinary cultivators have to cultivate for at least 5 years to double the Naiden of the Zhuji phase? You did it in just a few days. Do you know why?" Li Yundong was stunned. He was also a smart person and quickly reacted. He looked at the cup on the tea table beside him and said, "Could it be?" Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "You finally found out? Don't tell me you didn't notice it before. Do you know what you are drinking? Don't really think that you are a rare genius in 1,000 years. You can make such rapid progress in cultivation. Let me tell you, even a rare genius in 10,000 years can't double his Shintong in a few days." Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, shouted in a low voice, "Hongling." Ruan Hongling stomped her feet and said indignantly, "Sister Zi Yuan, it's true. If I didn't say it, some people would have thought that it was his own ability. Your 9-turn-do pill is so precious, but you gave it to this guy. I only tasted one, but he took 2 at once. You are so unfair." Li Yundong was stunned. 9-turn-do pill? What is this? Ruan Hongling snorted coldly and said, "This is the supreme elixir of our sect. Although our Zhengyi school is not as famous as the Gazao sect for alchemy as the external alchemy sect, the external alchemy we refine also has a strange skill of seizing the good fortune of heaven and earth." As she said this, Ruan Hongling pointed to the cup on the tea table and said loudly, "The tea you just swallowed in one breath is the 9-turn-do pill. Although this elixir is not as good as the Renyuan Jindan of the Gazao sect, which can increase one's cultivation strength by 60 years, it can at least increase one's cultivation strength by 5 years. Not to mention anything else, such an elixir alone can be sold for tens of millions in the cultivation market. Do you think it is an ordinary pill of tonifying qi or Lu Wei Dihuang?" Although Li Yundong didn't know why the 9-turn-do pill was so precious, nor did he know how it was made, he was shocked when he heard that it could be sold for 10 million yuan. Go to see. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He pointed to the cup and then to himself. "Do you mean that I just drank 10 million yuan in one breath?" Ruan Hongling looked at him with jealousy and hatred. "It's 20 million yuan. You also swallowed a cup yesterday. This kind of elixir is extremely delicious, and it's full of fragrance. It's a pity that it was wasted by you." Zi Yuan couldn't bear to listen anymore. She shouted in a low voice, "Hongling, shut up." Ruan Hongling stamped her feet angrily. "Isn't that the case?" Zi Yuan glared at her. "Don't you listen to me?" Ruan Hongling snorted and turned her head away. Zi Yuan said softly to Li Yundong, "Your divine retribution is imminent. Cultivation is the most important thing. Moreover, these are just worldly possessions. Leaving them with me is like throwing a bright pearl into the dark. They won't be of much benefit. Such things should be left to people who need them more." Li Yundong sighed and said with emotion, "Anyway, I don't need to worry about it now. I owe you more than a little. I don't think I'll be able to pay it off in a short time." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "Did I say that I wanted you to pay it off?" Li Yundong was stunned. and his expression became a little strange. In his opinion, Zi Yuan had been helping him like this, but she had never asked for anything in return. This kind of behavior was simply incredible. Could it be that this fairy sister has fallen in love with me? A thought came to Li Yundong's mind for no reason, but he quickly denied it. Impossible. Even if she likes me, I don't like her. I like my girl. Li Yundong coughed dryly and said to Zi Yuan, "By the way, I haven't asked you yet. Why did you two come so late at night?" Zi Yuan said, "The divine retribution is getting closer and closer. I came to see how far you have progressed in your Shintong cultivation. By the way, do you have anything you want to learn?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "You want to teach me magic cultivation? What do you know?" Before Zi Yuan could speak, Wan Hongling rushed to say, "What are you talking about? Do you know how powerful Sister Zi Yuan is? There is no magic of the 5 elements that she doesn't know." Li Yundong didn't bother to bicker with this girl. He looked at Zi Yuan and asked, "Do you know Heavenly Thunder?" Zi Yuan was shocked. "You want to learn Heavenly Thunder?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Of course. I want to learn Heavenly Thunder." Zi Yuan frowned secretly and said, "You should know that the magic of the world can't be separated from the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Although there are thousands of Taoist magic, most of them are the same. Only Heavenly Thunder magic is above the 5 elements. Heavenly Thunder is the power of heaven. The power of heaven is unpredictable, and Heavenly Thunder is difficult to cultivate. Compared with Heavenly Thunder, the 5 elements are the easiest to learn. If you learn it to a high level, it will not be inferior to the power of Heavenly Thunder at all. Why do you want to give up the easy and seek the difficult? Why do you want to learn such a dangerous and difficult magic?" Li Yundong suddenly smiled. "You always tell me that the divine retribution is coming. But I don't even know what Heavenly Thunder is. How can I go through the divine retribution? As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Only by understanding Heavenly Thunder can I better deal with it. What's more." As Li Yunyang spoke, his face suddenly became very unruly. He sneered and said, "I remember you once said that the people of our Taoist sect pay attention to going against heaven. Man can conquer heaven. My fate is up to me, not to heaven." Li Yundong quickly walked past Zi Yuan and the others. He walked to the balcony, pointed to the starry sky outside, and said loudly, "But in fact, every one of you is afraid of Heavenly Thunder and divine retribution. Because of this, you don't dare to ask too much about the affairs of the world. For fear that divine retribution will come to you, you are willing to be a turtle hiding its head and showing its tail. Is this kind of evasion called 'my fate is in my own hands'?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "Because you are afraid of Heavenly Thunder, you don't dare to cultivate Heavenly Thunder magic. Because you are afraid of divine retribution, you don't dare to ask about the affairs of the world. What kind of cultivation is this? What kind of a man can conquer heaven? It's said that Heavenly Thunder is difficult to cultivate, but I don't believe it. I just want to prove that not only can I survive divine retribution, but I can also control Heavenly Thunder. Humph, the power of heaven is unpredictable. I just want to hold this power in my hands. Knowing that the path of cultivation is dangerous, so taking a detour is not cultivation. Only when you know that you can't do it, that's cultivation. I want to cultivate, and I must become a first-class cultivator in the world. I want to travel the 9th heaven, and the power of heaven can't stop me. I want to travel the 9th earth, and the chasm can't restrain me. I want there to be no more disasters in the world that can threaten me, and nothing can threaten my loved ones." Li Yundong stood on the balcony, the corners of his clothes fluttering in the wind, and his black hair was flying. His words were resolute and powerful, and his momentum shook Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling, who were from famous sections. Ruan Hongling stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. If Li Yundong had said such words in the past, she would have retorted, but she had witnessed Li Yundong recklessly attracting Heavenly Thunder to kill young Master He. Last time, it could be said that Li Yundong didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and did such a thing in a rush of blood. But now he was a cultivator through and through. He could still say such words in the face of divine retribution, which could only show that this boy had amazing courage and extraordinary courage that ordinary people didn't have. Where did the charm of a man come from? The charm of a man came from many places, but the most attractive thing to women was the fearlessness of a man who dared to challenge heaven and earth. Ruan Hongling looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She suddenly felt that there was a dazzling light on this boy's body, which made her unable to look directly at him. Zi Yuan was also shocked by Li Yundong's words. Nowadays, the cultivation world could be said to be a pool of stagnant water. All the sects and schools treasured their own treasures and were extremely selfish. They all thought that they would sweep the snow in front of their own door and not care about the frost on the roof of others. Every day, they haggled over every little thing and fought for power and profit. How could anyone make such a loud and soul-stirring cry in this dark, murky world? Zi Yuan took a deep breath. After all, she had a profound cultivation base, so she quickly recovered from the shock. She said, "Well, I'll teach you how to fly by qi first." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why do I have to learn how to fly by qi before practicing the magic of heavenly thunder? Do the two have anything to do with each other?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "If you don't learn how to fly, how can you understand one of the three great horrors of cultivation, the great horror between heaven and earth? If you don't understand the great horror between heaven and earth, how can you understand heavenly thunder, learn it, and master it, /om/. Chapter 221. Go to watch net. After Zi Yuan finished speaking, Li Yundong immediately nodded and said, "Well, how can I learn to fly by qi?" Zi Yuan was not in a hurry to speak. She turned her head and whispered to Ruan Hongling, "You go back first. I'll teach him how to fly by qi." Ruan Hongling nodded. Surprisingly, she was not in a bad mood. Before she left, she just glanced at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes and then flew back to her residence. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. After Ruan Hongling left, Zi Yuan said to Li Yundong, "In fact, it is not difficult to fly by qi, but the difficulty lies in the fact that people who want to fly by qi must have a huge amount of zhenqi. Ordinary people may not be able to cultivate their zhenqi to the point where they can grasp their own bodies even after cultivating for a lifetime. However, you obtained the Renyuan Jindan by chance. You have a huge amount of Jindan's primordial qi, and you are in the zhuji phase, so the zhenqi in your body is especially pure and vigorous. You don't have to worry about this." Li Yundong asked, "What exactly should I do?" Zi Yuan said, "Sit down on the futon first. I'll tell you later." Li Yundong sat down cross-legged and asked, "Then what?" Zi Yuan said, "Run your qi as usual, but be careful not to meditate. You have to maintain your divine sense and consciously control the zhenqi in your body to release it to your lower body." Li Yundong was already extremely familiar with the control of qi. He immediately followed Zi Yuan's instructions, closed his eyes, and mobilized the zhenqi in his body continuously, releasing it to his lower body. As soon as Li Yundong released his zhenqi, he felt as if there were countless tentacles under his body. It was as if he had a few more legs, and he could feel things outside his skin. After a while, after Li Yundong's huge zhenqi was released to a certain extent, his body slowly rose by half an inch. At first glance, it seemed that he was floating in the air. After a while, Li Yundong faintly felt that the qi under his cross-legged body seemed to have turned into a thick leg, lifting his body abruptly. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, suddenly said, "Now, open your eyes." Li Yundong opened his eyes and found himself floating in the air with his but half a foot off the ground. Li Yunyang was shocked. The qi in his body immediately became chaotic. As soon as the qi was chaotic, the turbid qi was born. His body fell from a height of half a foot and fell onto the rush cushion. Although Li Yundong's body had been reconstructed by the Jin Dan, he was not an invincible Vajra body. He couldn't bear falling down like this, especially when a man was sitting cross-legged. If he fell down on his buttocks, although he had his fat buttocks as a buffer, his two balls would also be affected. F***CK. Li Yundong felt as if someone had punched his lower body hard. The pain made him see stars and grimace. He looked at Zi Yuan, gritted his teeth, and said, "Why did you ask me to open my eyes? I almost fell to my death." Zi Yuan looked at him in confusion. "Is it very painful?" Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with a face full of hidden bitterness and said indignantly, "You women don't know what it feels like to have a pain in the ass." Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong and blinked her eyes. "Then do you know what it feels like for a woman to have her period every month?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I mean, this kind of thing shouldn't have come from a fairy like you, right? What's more, shouldn't you be a cultivator who was in the Zhuji phase before the arrival of Tiangui? How could you know how menstruation feels?" Zi Yuan said lightly, "My master said that cultivators have to taste all kinds of human emotions, so I simulated that scene and tried that feeling." Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with his mouth agape and tongue tied. In his mind, the scene of Zi Yuan, a fairy-like woman, changing a sanitary pad in the bathroom appeared. That scene was really disgusting, too disgusting. Li Yundong gave her a thumbs up and said to Zi Yuan, "Very good, you're awesome, you're invincible. I'm convinced. Let's not talk about this. What should I do next?" At the beginning, Zi Yuan felt that it was a little inappropriate to say this, but words that had been said were like water that had been poured out. How could she take them back? Although her face was slightly hot because of Li Yundong's words, fortunately, she had a strong ability to control it. She just said lightly, "You have to slowly learn to open your eyes and control your breath. Only when one's aura was stable could one's true essence be stable. Once one's true essence was stable, one would be able to grasp balance in midair and then use the power of true essence to catch oneself." Watch net. 7ko-/ Li Yunyang nodded. First, he closed his eyes and began to control his qi. Then, he released his jinqi and slowly lifted himself up. After reaching a certain level, she said, "Now, open your eyes." This time, Li Yundong opened his eyes and was mentally prepared. At first, his body only swayed slightly, but he soon stabilized. Zi Yuan nodded and then said, "Open your eyes and move your qi a little higher." Watch net. Li Yundong tried to control the jinqi to raise himself a little higher. Before long, he was already more than a meter above the ground. At this time, Zi Yuan said, "Slowly try to put your feet down." Li Yundong did as he was told and slowly put his feet down. As soon as he put his feet down, he immediately felt his body suddenly sink and he fell to the ground with a thud. Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why? Why do I feel like my body has become much heavier as soon as I put my feet down?" Zi Yuan explained, "Because when people sit cross-legged, the qi in the human body is the smoothest and smoothest. From the lower dantian of the lower abdomen to the yongquan acupoint of the feet, although the length of the qi does not change, the qi has to go from top to bottom and then from bottom to top. In the past, the qi had to go nearly a meter high, but after sitting cross-legged, it only needs to go about the height of a palm. Naturally, the qi will be smoother. So when you put your legs down, the qi in your body suddenly becomes less smooth, so you feel that your body is heavy." Li Yundong suddenly understood. "Then what should I do?" Zi Yuan said, "It's easy. When you put your legs down, speed up the flow of qi." Li Yundong nodded to show that he understood. He sat down cross-legged again and slowly used qi to make himself float. When he was more than a meter above the ground, he opened his eyes and slowly put down his legs. This time, with experience, his body only suddenly sank an inch, and then he stabilized his body. Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Well, that's it. When you get used to it, you can fly directly." You don't need to sit cross-legged to fly. As she spoke, she walked to the balcony, and then her body suddenly floated out of the balcony. Her body was suspended in the air. Ziyuan smiled at Li Yundong and said, "Now, come out with me and experience the great horror of heaven and earth." Li Yundong was a little stunned. Now? Immediately? I just learned how to float. You want me to fly? Isn't it a little too fast? Ziyuan asked with a smile, "What's wrong? You were so brave just now, and now you want to retreat?" Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said, "Are you kidding? Come on." After that, he controlled the Jinqi in his body to move fiercely. His body sped up in an instant, and he rushed out of the living room and flew out of the balcony. Li Yundong flew into the air. This was the first time he had flown in the air. He couldn't help looking down and suddenly saw that the ground under his feet seemed to have turned into a huge mouth in an instant. It was opening its bloody mouth at him, waiting for him to fall down and swallow him in an instant. This terrible sense of vertigo at such a high altitude made Li Yundong's heart suddenly jump. His chi suddenly sank, and his whole body also sank. This sinking didn't matter, but Li Yundong immediately felt a terrible sense of weightlessness, which made his heart beat wildly and his chi and blood surge. His body tilted and he quickly fell to the ground. Li Yundong cursed in his heart, but as soon as this thought flashed through his mind, his wrist was grabbed with a snap. It was Ziyuan who stretched out her white and soft hand and gently grabbed his body. Ziyuan said with a smile, "There is great horror in the world. Only by defeating this kind of horror can you keep your chi stable and smooth in any state. Only when your chi is 100% stable can you attract heavenly thunder. In this way, when heavenly thunder falls, it can hit your target more accurately." Although Ziyuan didn't directly laugh at Li Yundong felt that her smile seemed to be mocking him for talking big just now. He was a proud person, so he immediately thought to himself, "If she can do it, why can't I?" After thinking about it, Li Yundong took a deep breath and guarded his soul tightly. His mind was blank. After he stabilized his body, he said to Ziyuan, "Okay, let go." Ziyuan let go of his hand, and sure enough, she saw Li Yundong floating steadily in the air. Fortunately, the colors of the clothes they were wearing were not conspicuous, and it was late at night. Otherwise, if someone saw them, it would be the headline of the next day's news. Ziyuan nodded to Li Yundong and said, "Fly up with me and see how high you can fly." After Li Yundong guarded the spiritual platform tightly, the aura all over his body was vigorous and condensed, and it did not dissipate. This also made his state of mind calm and steady, no longer as impatient as before when he encountered something unexpected. He nodded and said, "Okay." After that, he controlled his body to fly up. Li Yundong controlled his Jinqi to fly up continuously. He felt as if there was an invisible hand wrapping around him and constantly pulling him up. Gradually, his flying speed became faster and faster, and he flew higher and higher. After a while, the building where he had lived before was already dozens of meters above his feet. Ziyuan followed closely beside him and said loudly, "You have to remember, don't fly on a thunderstorm, let alone use a magical item to fly. Otherwise, it will be easy to attract heavenly thunder. Now you can go back. If you fly any higher, you will attract heavenly thunder." Li Yundong didn't answer her. He seemed to be holding back his breath to prove something in his heart. He still controlled his body to fly quickly into the sky. Ziyuan was stunned. Seeing that Li Yundong was still flying up, she couldn't help but shout, "Stop flying. It's dangerous to fly any higher." Li Yundong didn't seem to have heard her. He wanted to challenge his limits, and he also wanted to experience the great horror between heaven and earth. He rushed up into the sky with all his might, as if he wanted to poke a hole in the sky. Although there was a bright moon that night, there were many dark clouds in the sky, and they were low and thick. After Li Yundong passed through the clouds, he suddenly found that there was an open space in front of him. The moon, which was like a silver plate, was hanging high in the vast sky, enchanting and unusually bright. Li Yundong only felt that the sky was so vast that he was as small as a speck of dust in it, with nothing to rely on. The sky is so vast, and people are so small. Li Yundong sighed in his heart. But if this is the great horror between heaven and earth, it's too much of an exaggeration. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly felt an extremely terrible force gathering in the air. There seemed to be a black hole around him, constantly rotating and pulling the dark clouds below. The dark clouds were constantly pulled and gathered, and soon turned into a ferocious face with twisted eyebrows and wide eyes. The bright moon that had been sleeping just now happened to be in the position of the vertical pupil between the eyebrows in this terrifying face. It was cold and gloomy, like the cold and emotionless eyes of a god. When Li Yundong was stared at by this eye, he felt his whole body go numb, and a creepy feeling spread all over his body in an instant. Then, there was a loud explosion in the sky. Thunder and lightning were rolling in the ferocious face of the dark clouds. Li Yundong was in the middle of the coming terrible heavenly tribulation. His hair stood on end, and the blood in his body seemed to freeze in an instant. The great horror between heaven and earth is like this. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He could feel his body trembling uncontrollably. Just as the heavenly lightning was about to strike, a figure suddenly flashed to his side and grabbed him. "Hurry up and leave. I recommend a Biyao fantasy book. Immortal Golden Body is also a cultivation theme. If you are interested, you can read it. In addition, Fox's Nest 1, 2, and 3 are full. Please join the new 4th group, 45316576/om/. Chapter 222. Go to watch net. Zi Yuan grabbed him and rushed toward the ground like a bolt of lightning. Watch net. 7 km. It was so fast that Li Yundong could hear the sound of the wind whistling in his ears. The wind was so strong that it made his cheeks ache. Zi Yuan quickly pulled Li Yundong back to the balcony of his residence. As soon as their feet touched the ground, Zi Yuan couldn't help saying in a stern voice, "Are you crazy? Fly that high? Didn't they say that flying too high would attract the heavenly tribulation?" Li Yundong was still in a daze, his eyes fixed on the sky. Seeing his expression, Zi Yuan was shocked. Did I speak too harshly just now? If it left a shadowed inner demon in his heart, it would be bad. It would cause his progress to stagnate. Thinking of this, the expression on Zi Yuan's face eased a lot. She wanted to say something to comfort him, but he suddenly jumped up and laughed. Zi Yuan was puzzled. What are you laughing at? Li Yundong smiled and said, I can fly. Zi Yuan's eyes widened. You can fly? Didn't you see the impending heavenly tribulation? Why are you so happy about this? Li Yundong looked at her with a smile and said, I saw it. But what of it? I'm still alive, aren't I? Zi Yuan was stunned and said, Don't you feel afraid of the great horror between heaven and earth? The smile on Li Yunyan's face faded a little, and he said lightly, I was really scared just now, but now that I think about it, I feel that I want to learn the heavenly thunder even more, because if I can master such a powerful power, it will be a great pleasure to conquer. Zi Yuan looked him up and down in shock. She shook her head secretly and said, This person is definitely a freak in the cultivation world. This is the first time I've seen a cultivator who is not afraid of the divine tribulation. I really don't know if he's faking it or if he's stupid. Li Yundong saw her expression and asked with a smile, You don't believe me? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, It's not that I don't believe it, I just find it unbelievable. Watch net. Are your guts made of steel? Li Yunyang smiled and said, I just think that we have to look at the good side of things. The good thing just now is that I know what the great horror of heaven and earth is, and I have also learned to fly. Most importantly, I am still alive. As long as people are still alive, there are infinite possibilities, right? Ziyuan found that although the boy in front of her had just entered the path of cultivation, sometimes the words he said could also make people's eyes light up and think deeply. She smiled and said, "You have a first-rate temperament. However, don't be so reckless next time. Don't touch the great terror between heaven and earth so easily. Also, since you've learned how to fly, let's call it a day. I'll head back first." As he spoke, his figure flashed and he was about to fly back to Ruan Hongling's home. As Li Yundong watched her fly over, he suddenly had an idea and asked, "Hey." Ziyuan stopped in mid-air and turned to look at him. He asked with a smile, "How does it feel to put on a sanitary pad when you have that?" Ziyuan's body shook and she almost fell from the air. She glared at Li Yundong with shame and anger. She wanted to say, "What does it feel like for you men to have a pain in the ass?" But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she couldn't say them out loud. Li Yundong's prank had succeeded, so he stopped bickering with her and went into the room with a laugh. Ziyuan was left alone in the air, staring at Li Yundong's departing figure with a flushed face. Fortunately, it was night time. Otherwise, if this bastard saw her reaction, it would be so embarrassing. Ziyuan took a deep breath and calmed down before returning home. As soon as she entered the balcony, Ruan Hongling immediately came up and asked, "Sister Ziyuan, what happened just now? Why do I feel like there was a divine punishment? What a terrible divine power." Ziyuan said with some resentment, "Li Yundong is a newborn calf who is not afraid of tigers. He flew very high in one breath and almost caused a divine punishment." Ruan Hongling's eyes suddenly widened. So he was scared? Ziyuan couldn't help but say with a strange expression, "It doesn't seem like it. On the contrary, his fighting spirit has increased." Ruan Hongling was stunned on the spot and could not come to her senses for a long time. After a long time, she sighed faintly and said, "Sister Ziyuan, do you think he can survive the heavenly tribulation?" Ziyuan's expression suddenly became very serious. She thought about it seriously and said, "I don't know. Based on the current situation, it's unlikely." Ruan Hongling sighed and said, "If he can survive the heavenly tribulation, it is very likely that he will become a great cultivator with great magical power in the future." Ziyuan suddenly smiled and shook her head. Watch net. Color *** literature _learning %super #speed. Update. Ruan Hongling asked, "You don't believe me?" Ziyuan still shook her head and said, "No, it's not very likely, but definitely. Moreover, as long as he can survive the heavenly tribulation, he will grow into a powerhouse that only appears once in 100 years in the cultivation world. He might even be able to establish his own sect." Ruan Hongling was extremely shocked. She felt that she had already thought highly of Li Yundong, but she hadn't expected that Ziyuan would think even higher of him. Establish a sect? Wouldn't that be a great master like Zhang Sanfeng and Wang Yangming? Ruan Hongling said in shock. Can he compare with such a person who only appears once in 500 years? Ziyuan looked at the place where Li Yundong lived, and her eyes suddenly became very distant. She said lightly, "This guy, Humph, as long as he survives the heavenly tribulation, then everything is possible." It was the first time that Li Yundong had learned to fly. He practiced repeatedly for a long time all night. It was not until dawn that he felt a little tired. He sat cross-legged in the living room and rested for a while. Then, he carried the fan of 7 treasures and went to school. As soon as he entered the school, a curious student came up to Li Yundong and asked, "Boss, what's going on at the welcoming party? What are you going to do?" At first, Li Yundong could still smile and say, "You'll know when the time comes." But later, there was an endless stream of people asking questions. Li Yundong couldn't stand it anymore and had to flee. As soon as he fled into the teaching building, he saw Feng Na and a few people discussing something in the stairwell. As soon as Li Yundong saw her, he became angry. He said, Feng Na. Hearing the voice, Feng Na turned her head and laughed. Yo, the big star is here. Li Yundong said angrily, you made it impossible for me to stay in this school. Feng Na covered her mouth and laughed. There's a price to pay for being a star. The welcoming party will start in 2 days. It'll be fine then. Hey, by the way, remember to come to the rehearsal this afternoon. Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said grumpily, I'm not going. With that, he walked away. Feng Na chased after him and said, hey, you have to come. You have lines. Don't fall apart during the performance. Li Yundong chuckled. You were the one who asked me to act, but I can't guarantee the effect. As he said this, he finally found a little pleasure of revenge. He smiled at Feng Na and said, I'm very vengeful. Feng Na watched Li Yundong walk away, dumbfounded. She stomped her feet angrily. That bastard. Her classmates were dumbfounded. They didn't have much contact with Li Yundong, and the only news they knew was hearsay or what they saw on the forum. But today, they found that this legendary figure, who seemed so high and mighty and unreachable, was actually such a scoundrel. Feng Na, one of her classmates, said to Feng Na, it seems that asking him to do the performance might not be a good thing. Before Li Yundong entered the classroom, he could hear the students in the classroom discussing what had happened in the small auditorium the day before. Some of the students who had gone to the voting were describing the scene vividly, while others who had not gone were beating their chests and stamping their feet in regret. Li Yundong walked to the door and hesitated. He didn't know whether he should go in or not. If he did, he was afraid that he would be surrounded by a crowd of people. That would not feel good. While he was hesitating, he suddenly saw Ding Nan walking toward the classroom with a small bag in her hand. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He immediately went up to her. Ding Nan, it's time to tell me where Zhou Qin is today, right? Li Yundong asked. Ding Nan couldn't help but look at Li Yundong's eyes, trying to find a trace of hypocrisy in them. But after a long time, she couldn't find anything. She had to give up. But she was also a little unwilling to give up. She snorted coldly and asked, everyone is avoiding her now. Are you sure you really want to go? Li Yundong retorted, if you flatter her when you gain power, and throw her to the ground when you lose power, what's the difference between you and a despicable person? Ding Nan couldn't help but feel angry. She thought that Li Yundong was calling her a despicable person. It's human nature to seek benefits and avoid harm. Do you understand? I saw that you were different from the others. That's why I tried to persuade you. How could you say that? Don't be so childish. Li Yundong said in a low voice, if this is maturity, then I'd rather be childish for the rest of my life. Since she is my friend, then I should help her when she is in the most difficult situation. Otherwise, what kind of friend would I be? Ding Nan felt very uncomfortable. On the one hand, she still stubbornly believed that Li Yundong was pretending to be more powerful than he was, but on the other hand, she subconsciously hoped that she could be like Zhou Qin and receive such care and concern from Li Yundong. There are many people in this world who add flowers to embroidery, but there are few who offer help in times of need. Is he such a person? Ding Nan stared at Li Yundong blankly. She felt as if her heart was being twisted by a knife. No, he must be trying to save face. When he sees Zhou Qin, he won't say that. Seeing that Ding Nan was silent, Li Yundong said in a low voice, Ding Nan, even if your relationship with her is not good now, you should still go and see her for the sake of your good relationship in the past. Ding Nan jumped up as if her tail had been stepped on. My relationship with her has never been good. She's just using me. Li Yundong immediately said, aren't you also using her? Ding Nan felt as if someone had stabbed her in the heart. She lost her composure and shouted, the First People's Hospital of the city. If you want to go, go by yourself. I hate her, I hate her. Li Yundong had wanted to persuade Ding Nan, but when he heard that Zhou Qin was in the hospital, he couldn't stay any longer. He turned around and ran out of the school. Ding Nan stood where she was. She couldn't stop the tears from flowing down her cheeks. She murmured, "Why can't I let you look at me again? Now that you know her whereabouts, you're not even willing to talk to me, /om/." Chapter 223. Go to Watch Network. After Li Yundong arrived at the First People's Hospital of the city, he asked the inpatient department about Zhou Qin's room. Go to net. Super_speed. More. New. Hello, the patient you want to visit is in room 502 of the general care ward of the first building of the inpatient department. Now is the family visit time, you can go to visit. The nurse with a sweet voice said something that surprised Li Yundong. Why is Zhou Qin in the general care ward? A bad thought suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. He quickly rushed to Zhou Qin's ward. Along the way, the strong smell of medicine in the inpatient department made Li Yundong feel that it was like an open concentration camp. Compared with the inhumane concentration camp during World War II, the only difference between this place and the inhumane concentration camp was that it was operated legally. The people inside wanted to get out, but they couldn't get out for a while. The people outside didn't want to come in, but they would eventually come here for various reasons. It was as if this was the home of people. When he arrived at the corridor on the 5th floor of the first building of the inpatient department, there were many old people walking with crutches and family members helping to hold the infusion bottles. Li Yundong felt like he was in a strange world. He couldn't imagine why a woman like Zhou Qin would be in such a place. Li Yundong followed the room number all the way. When he found room 502, he found that although there were 4 beds in room 502, the 4 beds were empty. There was only a woman with long hair sitting in a wheelchair with her back to him. Li Yundong walked into the ward and asked, "Hello, may I ask?" As soon as his voice sounded, the woman in the wheelchair trembled all over. Then she couldn't help but tighten her grip on the armrest, and her body trembled slightly. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He quickly walked up to the woman and saw that there was a beautiful woman sitting in the wheelchair, but her skin was pale and her eyes were lifeless. It was Zhou Qin. This shock was no small matter. Li Yundong couldn't believe his eyes. Where was the proud, confident, and beautiful Zhou Qin who was usually proud and confident? How did Zhou Qin, who used to be a woman who was not inferior to men, become like this? He couldn't help but squat down and grab Zhou Qin's hand with both hands, but she shrank back as if she had been electrocuted. He felt as if someone had hit him in the head with a stick. His head was buzzing, and his heart was anxious and irritated. How did you become like this? Zhou Qin's dark eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Her inner world was like a stormy sea. He's here, he's finally here. When everyone left me and didn't dare to come into contact with me, he finally came. Zhou Qin's lips moved slightly, and her retracted hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to reach out again and touch his warm fingertips. But just as she was about to reach out, there seemed to be a demonic voice shouting in her mind, "Wake up! Look at you now. You are a useless person. You have nothing left. Other than your beautiful face, what else do you have that is worthy of his love? You're just a burden now. You'll only become his burden." As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, her slightly straightened fingers curled up again. Watch net. Her heart was tumbling, but the expression on her face did not change at all. It only became more and more indifferent. This kind of expression made Li Yundong more and more shocked. He was more and more sure that something amazing must have happened to Zhou Qin, and it was very likely to be related to him. "Zhou Qin, what the hell happened? Tell me, tell me. Maybe I can help you." Li Yundong couldn't help shouting anxiously. But Zhou Qin did not speak. Her eyes became colder and colder, and her body trembled more and more violently. Li Yundong was about to ask more questions, but he heard a magnetic low voice coming from the door. "Don't ask any more. Let me tell you. Hearing this, Li Yundong turned his head and saw Zhou Kachang standing at the door in a gray Chinese tunic suit, holding a hot water bottle in one hand and a freshly washed lunch box in the other. Li Yundong looked at him in surprise. He didn't dare to compare Zhou Kachang, who had been surrounded by so many people when he came to school last time, with this Zhou Kachang in front of him, whose hair was a little gray at the temples and eyes were no longer as intimidating and dignified as usual. The former was a high-ranking official who had been in a high position for a long time, while the current one was just an ordinary middle-aged man who took care of patients. You. Li Yundong stammered. He had an obvious feeling in his mind, but he didn't dare to confirm this result. Zhou Kachang put down the things in his hands. He looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look and said, "Come out and talk." Li Yundong glanced at Zhou Qin, stood up, and followed Zhou Kachang out of the ward. Zhou Kachang walked in front of them and didn't speak all the way. When they walked out of the hospital building and came to the lawn downstairs, he pointed to the bench beside the cobblestone path and said, "Sit here." After Li Yundong sat down, he couldn't wait to ask, "Deputy Governor Zhou, what on earth?" Zhou Kachang didn't wait for him to finish. He waved his hand and said lightly, "I'm no longer a deputy governor. I'm just an ordinary person now." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He asked tentatively, "Uncle Zhou, what happened? Can you tell me?" Zhou Kachang wasn't in a hurry to answer. He searched his body and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Just as he was about to light one, he seemed to remember something. He shook it at Li Yundong and asked, "Can I smoke?" Li Yundong said, "Yes." Zhou Kachang smiled. Just as he was about to light the cigarette, he heard Li Yundong say, "But Uncle Zhou, have you been having tinnitus recently? Your eyes are sometimes blurred, and your nose is a little hot when you breathe?" Zhou Kachang was stunned and stopped lighting the cigarette. He looked at Li Yundong in confusion and curiosity. "Yes, how did you know?" Li Yundong said, "Uncle Zhou, the ears belong to the kidneys, the eyes belong to the liver, and the nose belongs to the lungs. Your tinnitus means that your kidneys are not good. Your eyes are blurred, which means that your liver is not good. Go to the internet. If a person's liver and kidneys are not good, then he is already suffering from a disease of great deficiency. If you still smoke, your lungs will also become bad. If a person's lungs are not good, then his nose will also be bad. The accompanying symptom is that the breath he exhales will be hot." This was the first time that Zhou Kachang had dealt with Li Yundong. He hadn't expected that this young boy would have such a deep understanding of traditional Chinese medicine. Zhou Kachang laughed and said, "I've been smoking for decades. If it was bad, it would have been bad long ago." Although he said so, he still put away the cigarette. Zhou Kachang looked Li Yundong up and down. After a while, he sighed and said, "Don't you want to know what happened?" Li Yundong nodded. Zhou Kachang sighed and then slowly told him what had happened to Zhou Qin after Li Yundong left. When he talked about the failure of Zhou Qin's negotiation with him, Zhou Kachang sighed and said, "I should have expected it." Li Jiandong was shocked when he heard this. He hadn't expected that he would cause such a violent turmoil and bring such a terrible disaster to Zhou Qin and the Zhou family. A rising family had fallen because of him. Li Yundong was stunned on the spot, and his mind was in a mess. When he heard Zhou Kachang's words, he subconsciously asked, "Expected what?" A trace of regret and pain flashed in Zhou Kachang's eyes. He raised his head and looked at the blue sky, as if he was recalling something. "When Qin was born, my brother found a master to help her name. At that time, the master said that Qin was a metal element and had a murderous aura between her eyebrows. In the future, her character would be strong and she would rather break than bend. In order to reduce her murderous aura, he named her Zhou Qin." Zhou Kachang smiled bitterly. "At that time, I was young and arrogant, and I was an atheist. Of course, I scoffed at this. I felt that Zhou Qin sounded too weak. I, Zhou Kachang, wanted to name my daughter more domineering than others, so I changed her name to Zhou Qin. She was named after the Qin dynasty, the ruler of the world. Li Yundong, who was listening attentively, also sighed and said, looking forward to a daughter becoming a phoenix and a son becoming a dragon is what parents desire. Zhou Qin does have the bearing of a big family. Zhou Keqiang sighed, what a pity, it was my desire that turned around and harmed her. For so many years, I have constantly imposed my wishes and will on her. I hope that she will follow my path and take over my job, but I have never asked her for her opinion. At first, she was very obedient, but until... Zhou Keqiang turned his face and looked at Li Yundong. He said slowly, until she met you, she began to show more and more rebellious psychology. No, it should be said that the true self in the depths of her heart began to awaken. She longed for freedom, and she longed to pursue her own love. Love. Zhou Keqiang shook his head, and there was a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth. It's really something that makes people crazy. For this thing, just like what that master said, she did something that she would rather break than bend. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He asked, what happened? Zhou Keqiang looked straight at Li Yundong and said firmly, under the aggressive pressure of the He family, the task force focused all the pressure on Qin. They believed that if they put a little more pressure on this girl, she would collapse, and they would get the answer they wanted. In this way, they could naturally lay their hands on you. Li Yundong's heart tightened when he heard this. He asked, and then? Zhou Keqiang was silent for a while, then he said slowly, then. Qin realized that things could not be good, so she decided to use her own death to calm everything down. She told the task force that she had decided to confess everything, asked for a pen and paper, and then asked the task force to leave her alone. Zhou Keqiang smiled bitterly. But as soon as the task force left, she quickly wrote a few words on the paper, and then she jumped from the window on the 4th floor. What? Li Yundong was so shocked that he jumped to his feet. Although Li Yundong hadn't seen this scene with his own eyes, at this moment, Li Yundong was shocked by Zhou Qin's determination to jump and her determination to break rather than bend. Seeing Li Yundong's reaction, Zhou Keqiang asked, do you know what Zhou Qin wrote before she jumped? Li Yundong asked in shock, what words? Zhou Keqiang said word by word, it was written, the killer, Zhou Qin. Although Li Yundong had a deep understanding of Zhou Qin, he still underestimated the power that this girl could burst out. For his sake, she had actually shouldered such a great disaster on his own head. Zhou Keqiang looked at the extremely shocked expression on Li Yundong's face. Suddenly, the indignation and resentment in his heart dissipated a lot. To be fair, if one didn't look at his background, the boy in front of him was indeed worthy of Zhou Qin's love. He was indeed an extremely outstanding boy in modern society. However, was it worth it to pay such a big price for loving someone? Li Yundong was shocked for a long time before he came to his senses. He turned his head to look at Zhou Keqiang and asked incredulously, don't you hate me for getting you into this? Zhou Keqiang glanced at Li Yundong. In the first few days, I wanted to shoot you. However, after everything had settled down, I suddenly saw the light. Heh, isn't this how the ups and downs of the world work? Now I want to take Qin abroad to see a doctor and try to help her stand up on her own in the future. Li Yundong was shocked again. She can't stand up? Zhou Keqiang said in a heavy voice, her spine was damaged. The doctor said that she was very lucky. There were no serious injuries elsewhere, but she was also very unlucky. There was a congestion tumor between the 10th and 11th vertebrae. The existing medical means can't remove it. If it is forcibly removed, there is a risk of paralysis in the future. Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, I'll go and see Zhou Qin. As he said this, he walked quickly to the ward. When he got there, he found Zhou Qin lying in the ward, and her wheelchair had also fallen to one side. The girl was struggling to crawl forward on the ground, her eyes fixed on the glass on the cabinet not far away. Li Yundong's heart trembled at this moment. He quickly stepped forward, picked her up, and put her back in the wheelchair. Zhou Kachang, who had rushed over, couldn't help sighing. He said, "Why are you so stubborn? Why didn't you ask the nurse to help you? Why did you have to be so stubborn?" Zhou Qin's lips were tightly pressed together. Her face was as cold as frost, and there were tears in her eyes. However, she stubbornly held them back, and her eyes were a little red. Zhou Qin didn't want Li Yundong to see her like this, so she turned her face away. However, the moment Li Yundong held Zhou Qin in his arms, he suddenly felt a familiar aura in Zhou Qin's body faintly responding to him. Li Yundong couldn't help reaching out to feel the pulse on Zhou Qin's wrist. With this, he suddenly found that there was his Renyuan Jindan's qi in Zhou Qin's body. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that when he had first reached the Zhuji phase, Zhou Qin had boldly separated him from Su Chan. It must have been at that time that his Renyuan Jindan's qi had poured into her body. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He couldn't help thinking, although she has been seriously injured, her bones and internal organs are intact. She has virgin Xianin qi and my Jindan's qi in her body. Her qi is so strong that it's impossible for the blood clots and tumors in her spine not to dissipate. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong understood. I know, it must be because Zhou Qin doesn't know how to use her qi, so she doesn't know it. If I use my qi to dispel her hematoma, she will be able to stand up again. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.